Morning, we're going to call this meeting of the Tahoe Living Working Group to order. The date is Monday, June 23rd, and it is 8:34 a.m. First item on the agenda today is the roll call to determine quorum. Jessica, can you please read the Tahoe Living Working Group roll?
Brendan Ferry, incoming leader. Emily Setzer,
Here.
Linda Doherty. Jessica Wackenhut Lamelli.
Here.
Courtney Whitey. Chris Wood.
Sure.
Cindy Gustafson. Cody Bass. Vince Honigman. Alexis Hill. Daniel Huerta.
Here.
Rob Olson.
Almost here.
Mia Kong. Gavin Feiger.
Here.
Jean Diaz.
Here.
Aubrey Powell. Elizabeth Ballman.
Here.
Katie Houston. Sarah Schmidt. Christina Kind. Here. Sophia Heidrich. Erica Gonzalez.
Here.
Enod Locke. Enod Juron Locke. Sorry about that.
Eric Young is attending in for Courtney Whitey, and he just walked in.
Okay, great. And that's it. That's all for the working group.
Thank you. Although we don't need this for our quorum, this is also a meeting of the community partner group. And so we will call roll for the CPG as well. Jessica.
Okay, so I will call out the organization name. Please say your name if you are here representing that organization. The first one is United Way of Northern Nevada and Sierra. St. Francis Assisi.
Here. Here, Jim McGinley, MC, GINLEY.
And Flint Brenton, remote,
And sorry, say that again, Flint Breton.
yes.
Okay. Sierra Community House.
Here, Denise Vega Zarate.
Legal Services of Northern California. Advance. Lake Tahoe Community College. North Tahoe Truckee Homeless. Family Resource Center. Sierra Native Alliance. Achieve Tahoe. And Washoe Tribe of Northern California and Nevada.
We have Laura Alvarez from the Family Resource Center. And from the previous roll call, Sophia is here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then that's it.
Okay, we don't actually have comments today, but welcome, everybody. Welcome and thank you for coming. We appreciate everyone's time as we enter the next phase here of cultivating communities. So we will now go over the meeting rules for the day. Jessica, could you please read the Zoom protocols?
So if you are online and participate in the discussions, please utilize the hand raising function in the control panel on the Zoom meeting, which you should see under the happy face in the reaction section. If you're joining us by phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to toggle mute and unmute. If you're in person on the mic, please tap the face that looks like it's speaking in order to speak. Please do not use the chat function except to let us know that you would like to speak. We will have the opportunity for an additional public comment during the meeting. If you have additional comments, please feel free to email Karen Fink or Jacob Stock after the meeting. Please refrain from using the chat to have any sidebar conversations, as this can clutter the feed and cause delay. Finally, everyone remember to mute your mic unless you are speaking to cut down on background noise.
Thank you. We are now on agenda item 5, public interest comments. These are for public comments only. So note that the public will also be able to participate in the activities, and we will have public interest comments at the end of the meeting tomorrow as well. Members of the public participating in this working group meeting via the Zoom app on their computer, smartphone, or tablet should raise their hand now to indicate if they wish to speak, and they will be unmuted by TRPA staff. Please note that Tahoe Living Working Group is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public that are not listed on this agenda. Is there anybody? Nick?
Yes, in the podium. There's a podium right there. Should I speak
Yeah,
there?
sure.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Spiel, I live in South Lake Tahoe, and I just wanted to commend staff and the consultants for putting together the briefing book. Had a chance to look through that and just found it extremely comprehensive, very thorough, and full of great ideas that honestly reflected the public participation process. And so I'm really looking forward to this several-day session. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Anyone online? There are no hands raised on my comment. Okay, then I will close public comment. And we will now go to approval of the agenda. Jacob, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Okay, we will deem the agenda approved for the record. We are now on agenda item 7, disposition of minutes. We have a set of minutes from the May 19th, 2025 working group meeting. The minutes are posted on the Tahoe Living Working Group webpage. Are there any questions or comments about the minutes from any working group members? No online. Okay. So we will ask for a motion to approve the May 19th minutes. Motion to approve. 1 second. Thank you. Do I need to record who that was?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that was Christina Kind.
Can I just ask, did the attendees have the ability to unmute
They do.
themselves?
Yep. And who seconded that? Oh, thank you, Sophia. Thank you. And just do a, did you vote by acclamation? All in favor? Yes. Approval requires an affirmative vote of a majority of the quorum in attendance. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone object? Okay, the motion passes. We are now moving on to agenda item 8, the opening plenary. So I'll turn this over to Jacob Stock.
Hey, thanks. I'm gonna make use of this podium here. So hopefully everyone can hear me. Can we go to the next slide, please? First of all, I'm Jacob Stock. I'm a senior planner with TRPA, and I'm here to introduce this open plenary session of our little mini conference. Is kind of how we're designing this meeting of the Tahoe Living Working Group and Community Partner Group. Let's see what slide we're on now. Yeah, purpose of today's meeting. So this slide says purpose of today's meeting, but I actually want to talk about the purpose of the next 2 days of meetings. So we'll start with a warm-up discussion where we'll talk about our priority communities and town centers. Then after lunch this afternoon, and tomorrow morning, we're gonna have breakout sessions where we'll discuss policy ideas and topics for the project. So some of these, if you've reviewed the briefing book, it's these ideas that were summarized in the briefing book about some of the ways that we can address housing in our code and policies here at TRPA. So finally, tomorrow afternoon, we want to summarize some of the preliminary ideas that will advance for further consideration in this project. Next slide, please. So like I said, this meeting's designed kind of like an interactive mini planning conference. So for those of you who have been to urban planning conferences before, this will hopefully feel familiar, and for those who haven't, hopefully this will be fun and new for you. We'll have about 2.5 hours for each of the 4 sessions planned here. In the small group breakout sessions, you'll be assigned a policy area to go deep in. So that could be development rights, process costs and housing ideas, development standards and zoning. You'll be talking about one of those policy areas, and then you'll go a little bit deeper into that, into more subtopics in that policy area. So we recognize that you won't be able to participate in all of the policy discussions that interest you. We want you to go deep. We don't have time for everyone to talk about everything, unfortunately. So we want to make sure to provide other opportunities for you to share your thoughts and feedback on any areas that you don't get to discuss during the next 2 days. So like I said, we'll have an overarching discussion at the end of tomorrow afternoon. And you can always email me or Karen and share your ideas, or set up a meeting with me, however you want to do it. My virtual and real door, I actually don't have a real door, but my door is open, hypothetically. So next slide, please. We didn't do this already, did we? No, we did the Zoom protocol. So yeah, we went over meeting agreements a little bit at our last meeting of the Tahoe Living Working Group. So let me see if I actually don't have notes on this slide, and that's fine. So I'll just read you the slide. So meeting agreements, electronics, try to silence your cell phone, take calls. If you have to take a call, I understand it's a work day. People have to take calls. Please step out of the room to take those calls. Be comfortable, try to be comfortable and honest, sharing your opinion, and in doing so, also honor other people's time. So try to be as concise as possible. Some people are not going to have the same, you're going to disagree with people sometimes. And so, be courteous. All ideas and points of view have value. And speak to your own interests, advocate for what you think is going to work here, because this is the start of our journey towards coming up with some policy solutions that we're going to bring forward for the rest of this process. So these are an important couple of days. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get started with this opening session of our working group meeting. So some of the objectives for this session, we want to understand why it's important to define priority populations and areas, and we'll get more into what that means in a minute. We want to consider how these areas relate to land use planning and housing, and understand how TRPA and other agencies think about this idea of equity. So we did Zoom protocols already. Next slide. We did public interest comments, approval of agenda, good. Yep. All right. Okay, so cultivating community process. I just want to give a little overview of where we're at in this process for this project. So right now we're coming to the end of our assess and generate stage of the project. You've reviewed some of the ideas that have emerged from the first two stages. So from the listen and explore, the really deep public outreach phase, the assess and generate, where we're studying our code of ordinances, our policies, and coming up with some ideas. And now we're ready to refine and prioritize ideas that we'll explore in the remaining stages of this process. Next slide. So over the next 2 days, we want to confirm that we've defined and captured the right ideas moving forward. Generate additional ideas, maybe, pretty good chance we missed some stuff in the briefing book, so we want to hear from you on that. And prioritize ideas to explore moving forward. Eventually leading to draft policy recommendations in the next stage. So this is what I mean. This is an important decision point in this project. Next slide. So before we get started, let's review the overall vision and intended outcomes for the project. So our vision statement is up here. It's to adapt TRPA policy, regulations, and programming to facilitate community vitality and compact, walkable neighborhoods, and to meet the overall housing need for the Lake Tahoe Basin, while maintaining and improving conservation and preservation of Lake Tahoe and the surrounding areas. So it's really, we're talking about these two pieces of meeting our housing needs and while still maintaining our environmental protections. And the outcomes of the project being, more resilient communities, housing choice for members of our community, trust and community building. We want to grow our capacity as government and civil society to engage with the community, and we want to see more equitable outcomes. Next slide. Okay, so some questions to consider throughout the next couple of days. Who is this project for? What are the priority communities? We're going to talk about that this morning. What is the focus of this project? What type of housing are we looking to support through these policy and code changes? Do we want to focus just on deed restricted housing, lowering the cost of market rate housing? Maybe a combination of both of those things is what we want to focus on. And there's different policy solutions depending on what the answer to that question is. Where do we want to see housing at Tahoe? And how do the ideas generated in this project so far help us meet the overall housing needs of the basin as it was called for in our vision statement? Next slide. Okay, so in this project, we're focusing on the ways that TRPA policy and rules relate to housing production. So how does this work? There's a number of ways. The slide kind of lays them out at a really basic level. We can, TRPA policy can define how much housing there is in the basin through growth caps, through phasing of development rights allocations. It can define where housing is built through zoning rules, again, through the development rights system. It can say what type of housing we have through development standards, allowed uses, again, zoning, setbacks, land coverage, parking requirements. It can say who housing is for through deed restrictions and income categories in those deed restrictions. And it can also dictate how we go about building housing in the Tahoe Basin through the planning and development process. Next slide. Okay, so our project vision talks about meeting the projected housing need for the basin. So I'll leave you with the projected housing need as we currently understand it. And that's what you're seeing on this slide. So based on the housing needs assessments conducted between 2019 and 2023. We need just over 8,000 units to meet the overall housing needs for local residents and workers in the basin. So that's the gap in housing need that we see based on this analysis. So as you can see, about half of that is in the low and moderate income categories, half of that need. And half is above. So it's a pretty wide range of housing need across housing type and income categories. So we're currently working on a region-wide update of these numbers. So this will be updated in the next few months. But we expect that there's still a significant unmet housing need. So with that to chew on, I'm gonna hand it off to Chris Lepe for our discussion of priority communities.
Hello, everyone. Chris Lepe with Mariposa Planning Solutions, and I'm on the engagement team for this project and was previously involved with the Transportation Equity Study for TRPA. I wanted to lay out what the agenda is for this first set of modules. So we're going to be talking about priority communities for these first 45 minutes. So we'll have a presentation on TRPA priority populations and geographies, followed by a group discussion and report out. Then we're going to dive into more of a focus on growth management, things like town centers, and other methodologies such as the state of California's opportunity zones, and break out into a large group discussion at that point. And then we have another presentation or a review of equity geographies, issues, and opportunities. So we're going to look at the intersection between those first two discussions on priority communities and growth management in town centers, and then have another discussion. So that's the game plan for this first portion of our day. Let's kick it over to the next slide. So the community priority zones and town centers, that's what we're gonna be talking about right now. So the whole idea, if we go to the next slide, of what we're gonna be discussing here is we wanna get a greater understanding, get on the same page on TRPA priority communities and geographies, the CPZs as they're known, community priority zones. We're gonna discuss where these geographies align with the goals of Tahoe living and where they may fall short. The CPZs, the community priority zones, were developed as part of a regional transportation plan for the TRPA. So it's a transportation focus. Do those align with this housing orientation that we're talking about here? And then we're going to discuss the roles of priority communities and CPZs in the Tahoe living process, which is kind of sort of what I just discussed. So let's go to the next slide, please. So a little bit about priority communities. So these are communities that have historically and currently experienced unfair outcomes due to various different factors. And the ways, and Jacob's going to talk about this a little bit more, the ways in which these were identified were based on different demographics and other considerations like low income, minority status, limited English proficiency, disabilities, and other vulnerabilities. So this allows TRPA to focus resources. It's the idea of focusing, for example, transportation funds and projects in the areas where there are the greatest needs. It's not sort of the spread the peanut butter all over, equally type of concept, right? So that's the whole idea, equity versus equality. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand it actually over to Jacob to dive deeper on the priority community concept.
Get to know you exercise. I don't know.
Oh, did that get pulled out of the
Yeah,
slides or
we
something?
accidentally deleted.
Oh,
That's
shoot.
what- I don't know. It was a pair share exercise. We were just gonna have like people kind of pair up and like get to know each other for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
We have plenty of time because we're.
yeah, do we wanna,
Okay.
we can do that now, or we can find like a more natural start for the.
If you want to find a more natural stuff, that's fine.
Well, we have a small group exercise, so maybe that's.
Yeah, let's do that before the small group
Okay.
exercise. All right. Well, I'll continue then. I missed you guys. It's been a while. Okay. Right. So let's talk about some of the target areas for housing policy, these priority communities. that Chris was talking about. So just overall, we want to think about how should we even really be thinking about targeting housing policy? Why is it important to target housing policy in specific geographies? Why not target just the whole basin? Well, we talked about, there's a couple reasons why. We talked about the environmental preservation goal of this project. Targeting housing policy in concentrated areas makes it easier to provide needed services to those areas, and it also makes it easier to protect open space outside of those areas. So if we define, more concentrated areas where people live, then we have more opportunity for preserving larger natural areas. So let's talk about the ways we're thinking about priority communities and the areas to concentrate our housing efforts. Next slide, please. Okay, so the 2020 Regional Transportation Plan identifies what are called community priority zones. And these are areas in the Tahoe Basin that exhibit a high concentration of 3 or more indicators. And those indicators are what are listed up here on this slide. So they include 0-car households, adults, older adults 65 and older, persons living below the poverty line, households living below the poverty line, working age, people with disabilities, young people, so people under the age of 18, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Those are the indicators. So any area that that exhibits a high concentration of 3 or more of these aspects, according to the 2020 Regional Transportation Plan, is considered a community priority zone. So can you throw up the map here? So yeah. So analyzing that, those data, we've identified this area of Kings Beach, the grid in Kings Beach, Incline Village, what we call Tahoe Verde. So that's down on the south side of the Y in South Lake Tahoe. Sierra Tract and Bijou as community priority zones for transit and transportation work through our 2020 transportation planning efforts. We think this could be a good geography for workforce housing policy as well. But it's not the only way to think about it. So can you go to the next slide? So we're aware that federal policy is changing the ways we talk about our work, particularly in transportation, where federal funding is really crucial for transportation programs. So as a result, TRPA removed priority zones from the 2025 Regional Transportation Plan. We're no longer talking about them for transportation planning, although I guess I'm talking about them right now, sorry. And we're looking at other indicators for where to focus housing policy. So as it turns out, things like housing occupancy, so whether looking at the concentration of where people are living full time, can actually tell us a lot. There's a lot of correlation between these other indicators when we just look at, where's there a high concentration of full-time residents. And so that can tell us a lot when we're talking about where to target housing policy. And so, yeah, I'll hand it back off to Chris to talk a little more about this.
How much do you envision those yellow areas to change given the new policies?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
In the previous chart, you had yellow areas.
Oh, yeah.
Concentration areas. How much do you anticipate that those will change given the new policy?
Well, those have been removed from the 2025 Regional Transportation Plan. So for our, as far as our official transportation planning documents are concerned, we're not using those areas anymore. But for this project, we could use those areas, or we could use some variation of those areas. It's kind of, it's kind of up to us to decide, you know, where we want to target this policy, these policies and how we want to be thinking about them and defining them.
Mhm.
So that's a good question.
Yeah, that's what this conversation is about. Let's go to the next slide. And I just wanted for the Tahoe Living Working Group members, just to know, so I facilitate the community partner group, and we've already had an initial conversation about the community priority zones. Now, one new bit of information is this new change that just was, that Jacob just mentioned, with the federal policy in which the latest regional transportation plan are no longer using the CPGs, right? So for the CPG members, community partner group members, just an FYI that is, if you didn't realize that, it sounds new, it is new, because it wasn't presented to you before. Wanted to just make sure now for the rest of those present, Tahoe Living Working Group members in particular, just kind of wanted to share a little bit on the high level of what the CPG previously talked about. One other little note is that for the CPG, we're going to be presenting new additional information, for example, new maps, new considerations for you to chew on. So this is not all just relatively similar information, right? Some of it will be similar, and then you'll have some familiarity with it, but there's also going to be some new content shared out. So just FYI on that. So the first thing that came across in our conversation with the CPG was that, you know, the perspective that development should be focused in areas where you have services, things like more sidewalks, shops, and importantly, public transportation. So that was a kind of a strong perspective shared by most folks, especially as it relates to housing that accommodates some of these populations that we're talking about, right? Like low income people, folks that might not have access to a car. However, the other perspective was, you know, let's make sure that in doing so that we're not reinforcing segregation by focusing all of the affordable housing, for example, in areas where you already have a lot of low income individuals, a lot of existing, you know, market rate natural affordable housing, or like things like deed restricted affordable housing. So how do we balance that? That is part of the question that we want to kind of get into today. And then there was a little bit of a nuance also that kind of arose in thinking about more housing and things like, you know, focus areas. So we may have a different approach as it relates to affordable housing versus senior housing, workforce housing, and market rate housing in terms of the concentration or the distribution of housing geographically. So that's something to think about, is should there be a distinction there? Also, depending on the policy intervention, does that change? If we're talking about building new housing versus freeing up existing housing stock for the workforce and residents, or rehabilitating substandard housing as an example. These are just examples, right? So depending on the policy intervention, does that shift the way that we think about focus areas? So that's basically kind of what emerged from that initial conversation. For the CPG members that were there, anything else that you wanted to highlight that we talked about? I know it's been a while, it's been a couple months. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to jump into our small group reflection, and we'll have 20 minutes to discuss in small groups and tabletop discussion format, and then 10 minutes to share out. As part of that, please identify a share out leader, somebody report out, and then also a note taker. The draft group agreements and questions are on a table for you to use as a guide. And the questions that we have for you are, what do you like and dislike about the transportation, the priority community methodologies and indicators? And given the context we just shared, right, about sort of the federal restrictions, as well as the context of being in a housing policy conversation now, you know, what should we keep? What maybe want to jettison and not use anymore? So that's really, especially the second portion of the question, we want you to focus more so on that. Yes.
So so you're getting top-down direction that you can't employ the criteria that you've established, yet it appears you're saying that it's within our wherewithal to go ahead and use those criteria if we choose to do so?
That is a good question that I think probably somebody from staff at TRPA should answer. I think part of it is a kind of a legal funding oriented question, right? It also depends, by the way, if we're talking about the state of California versus versus the federal government, because the state wants very different things. They want an equity focused approach versus the national federal level, they want more of an equality oriented approach, or things like, for example, encouraging more families with children, right? So they have a different set of standards and interests versus the state of California right now, but feel free to jump in.
Could you actually repeat the question when people are asking it from the audience?
Sure.
The people on Zoom can't hear the questions.
Yeah, so the question, if I might, if I got it correct, is what if we're gonna be talking about the kind of reevaluating the priority community methodology and zones, and we already kind of understood from the federal government that we can't be using certain criteria, then is that sort of where you're trying to get at, or?
Well, to me, it seems like a disconnect, right?
Mhm.
We have established criteria.
Mhm.
They're not necessarily aligned with the new direction you're receiving. We're asked to give further comment
Mhm.
on that. Which way do we go? How do we solve out this top level disconnect?
Right.
Follow the existing criteria? Are we empowered to do that?
Mhm.
Or we embrace this new set of criteria?
Right, so do we go with some of the criteria that we've used before, some or all, versus using new criteria and, you know, given the federal picture, right?
Right.
So, yeah, Jacob, did you want to jump in, or Karen?
Or Karen, it looked like. did
No, if you have an
Okay,
answer.
well, yeah, I actually don't really have an answer for that. Yeah, you know, unfortunately, we're caught at TRPA, we're often caught between, two, you know, different
true, yeah.
prevailing
Yeah, Nevada
political
too,
winds
actually.
between Nevada and California, California and the federal government and Nevada sometimes, like it sort of depends on, you know, what the year is and which way the wind is blowing. This project in particular, is funded by a grant from the state of California. So we don't, I'll just leave it at that. Yes.
You should just asking for what do we think?
Yes.
the TRP
That-
policy should be?
That's really what we're asking you guys is where do you think we should be focusing our housing policies? You know, in terms of content and geography. And so that's kind of the point of this morning's discussion that hopefully we can hash out a little more. Yeah.
Has the federal government identified their criteria and that we could hear from you? And is there a list from California, and does Nevada have anything?
Well, you know, I will say first that this criteria that we were using was geared towards transportation planning from the beginning. And so, yeah, from the federal government, like Chris mentioned in passing, you know, we've heard a lot of different things. We've heard about, you know, concentrating resources where there are families with children. That's something I haven't, you know, studied that direction, and I'm not a transportation planner either, so I can't speak to that specifically, but you know, we do have an opportunity here from the perspective of housing planners to reconsider where we want to look at workforce housing policy.
Erica Gonzalez has her hand raised.
Just before we get to Erica, just one other thing to note. One thing that we talked about, if I may, internally with staff is this idea of, we had it as a bullet point. Jacob mentioned it earlier, but you might have missed it. That concept of surrogate indicators. So if you're familiar with that concept, it's using indicators that will still be able to identify areas of need, areas of disadvantage,
but not necessarily using, for example, race or income or disability, things that might trigger the red flags at the federal level. So for example, in transportation planning, because I'm more of a transportation planner by trade, the areas that have higher bicycle and pedestrian serious injuries and fatalities typically are lower income communities. Why? Because they're located near, major roadways, freeways, and so on and so forth, right? Also areas with high air pollution, with high levels of particulate matter. So the thing to kind of maybe put your thinking cap on, in part, is maybe thinking a little bit, yes, what are the demographic kind of indicators of interest, but also what are sort of the more of these outcome oriented, community indicators, right? Of like indicators related to like impact out there. So on the housing front, maybe we can use, for example, overcrowding as an indicator that matters, right? So anyway, so something to think about. So Erica Gonzalez, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, when you're referring to the federal government terms, are you referring specifically to certain executive orders? And if they're the diversity and equity inclusion related executive orders, has counsel for TRPA looked at whether they're actually enforceable? Because some of those executive orders were overly broad and not enforceable in certain ways. And then I guess the third question on that, has TRPA's counsel looked in comparison to the state grant that allowed for this program? Because that one might have special conditions that still allow us to operate within the community priority zones framework.
Right.
I can't speak to the first question as to what our legal counsel has looked into. We can certainly ask, but to the second point, yeah, this is funded by a California grant, so I don't think we need to be super constrained by those federal guidelines, like as Jean and Jacob were saying. I think for this group, we should just talk about what seems right for this
Right.
process, and we can figure out later.
Mhm.
Yeah, if we need to change words.
Erica, does that make sense? Did you have any kind of follow-up question or clarifying question?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we decide to move in a certain sort of direction, I think just conceding to the way that these executive orders are written isn't probably in TRPA's long-term best interest, because some of these are overly broad, and also, if we're not strategic, they could violate special conditions in the grant itself, since it's a state grant. So it's just something for that I've been dealing with on a nonprofit level and looking at the DEI executive orders. A lot of them are so unspecific that actually applying them hurts certain special conditions. So I think, yeah, that's the framework I think that's important to consider, and not just saying, okay, the federal government is saying this, because I don't think they're saying what people think they're saying.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm glad we have at least one legal mind in the room. Any other questions for folks here present or online? Before we jump into the activity? Good. Yeah, this is good, sort of priming of the pump there for the discussion. So do we still have plenty of time? 20 minutes for small group discussion? Or if you're only in one person at a table, you might want to team up with one of the other tables. What do you think? Groups of four, four, right? That feels about right. So yeah, team up together. And what about the folks online?
I'm gonna go to another room and facilitate the folks on the room.
Okay, awesome. That's interesting.
Okay, hi everybody online. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
Yes, hello.
Can you guys hear me online?
yeah,
Can you hear us?
Okay, great. Um, so, does anybody in this group want to be the person to kind of take notes and share out? We'll call on you from the group.
I can do it. This is Flint. Can you hear me?
Anybody? Okay, I can be the one to do that then. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this on my other screen so I can look more directly at people.
Karen, can you hear me?
Okay, so, okay, does anybody want to just kind of start out just saying any of your thoughts about, oh, okay, I can't hear you guys. Hang on. Okay, now I should be able to hear you. Can you guys speak again?
Can you hear me? This is Flint.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Thanks, Erica, for letting me know people are speaking. Okay, so did somebody volunteer to be the report, to take notes and report out?
Yes, I did. This is Flint.
Okay, thanks, Flint. Um, okay, so the question that, the first question is, just what are your thoughts on the community priority zones and the priority communities? Do folks think these are right? Should there be changes?
This is Dan from CTC. My first thought is I think we would want to keep these zones as far as keeping them in mind when developing policy. I mean, I don't think there's any reason not to consider these priority zones, especially when we're talking about housing and affordable housing and workforce housing. I mean, it's important to know where these communities are and who benefits from affordable housing. And so I don't see any reason why not to consider these. But yeah, I'd like to hear others' thoughts, maybe on why not.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to what it was that precipitated the decision that they should not be included. I mean, what was it? It said there was, this program was funded by the state of California, and it was implied that something in that grant precluded us from using these priority zones. But what was it, and why did we conclude that we couldn't use them? And if we can't use them, then why are I think this is what Jim McGinley was referring to. If we can't use them, why are we asking, should we keep them?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I want to reframe it a little bit, actually. So these community priority zones were developed for the transportation plan. And we just, as we started this project for something to start with, we just kind of we pulled them in and said, hey, we're going to try to focus on these areas to begin our work. But either way, we wanted to ask the group, like, look within the lens of this project, like this housing project, and say, are these community priority zones still the right zones for what we're doing right now? So I think the fact that the regional transportation plan had to take them out because they have federal funding, I think that's a little bit, that is not the most relevant point here. I think the most relevant point is just like, do we want to have some zones similar to that for this cultivating community project, and are these the right zones? So we can keep them, we can change them. We just want to make sure that we're looking at the right thing for this project.
So is it as simple as these priorities were established for transportation, but now we're talking about housing?
Yes, and these zones were established, and maybe they mentioned this before, but anywhere where there were 3 of these priority communities, 3 or more, where they overlapped in a zone, then that's where they picked the zone. And the priority communities, yeah, are shown on the screen right now.
I think what I'll say is, I agree with Daniel. I think it was Daniel's perspective that I think we can keep them in mind. It seems, having read the briefing book, that it doesn't quite matter in the same way it does for transportation, but I think that they have to be there in consideration. So the way that the regulations seem to be written, I think we could get a little messy if we're too focused on community priority zones as well. And I'll just caveat by saying that I've been looking at developmental rights. So the application in the law could feel a little weird focusing on community priority zones as opposed to transportation, where you're building like, bus stops or whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
So you're saying the law, given what you read in the laws that are relevant, the community zones may be less of a fit for housing than they are for transportation. So maybe we shouldn't worry about them as much. Is that what you're trying to say, Erica?
Kind of like some of the way that the incentives are written, like I think that's where we can look at the community priority zones on like distribution of allocations based on community priority zones, but like the whole structure of it's the law needs to kind of look beyond that. Does that make more sense, Flint?
Yes.
Cool.
So the other question that we're looking at is, what do you dislike about TRPA's priority community methodology and indicator? So I think the other question we want to look at is seeing these priority communities that are on the screen. Are these the right priority communities for this project? Or what do you like or dislike about these priority communities?
I have one thought or question. And I apologize if this has been discussed or if we have access to this information and I've missed it, but I'm wondering why it was determined that it needed to be 3 or more of these for it to be considered a priority zone. But it seems to me like, I don't know, like 2 of them would be enough for it to be considered a priority zone.
Yeah, I don't know why they picked 3, so I think that's a good point. Maybe it should be 2. Do any of these priority communities, like we had talked about when we did this, we kind of did an exercise like this internally with TRPA staff. And for instance, people, felt like some of these groups have very different needs, like older adults. Some, have very different transportation needs than others, and some might have very different housing needs than others. So I guess I'm just wondering, do you guys see anything in these priority communities where we might want to get more granular, or is a group missing? Or do we want to recharacterize any of these groups, or do you like these?
I think there's one group maybe missing for Tahoe, like if there's like any data on overcrowding, how households that are overcrowded or anything like that, that would be beneficial because I know that can be an issue.
Yeah, Daniel, you read my mind. That's it. I was just about to say that. And I think that kind of dovetails with, I'm wondering about zero car households because, in my view, it may very well be that you've determined, you have founded demographics around zero car households that are vulnerable households. But I think our experience is more like large households that don't have enough cars.
And would that go with overcrowding or would that be a
Yeah.
different, so overcrowding would capture large households that don't have enough cards?
Yeah.
So are we saying that we shouldn't call out large households that don't have enough cars, that just focusing on overcrowding will include that as a subset?
I think so.
Okay.
I think the other demographic that's missing, though, I'm trying to think a little bit broader as it applies to housing, but renters as a group. Um, I don't know how it quite dovetails and fits in there, but renters definitely, or like the amount of percentages of people that rent in certain areas. I don't know quite how these are categorized. That is one that I would add, though.
I also I'm looking at the persons living below the poverty line. I think it would be more useful or like a better indicator to use AMI, like people living people earning below 80% of the AMI, which is the definition of low income. I just know that the poverty line is like a really, really low income cap.
Do you mind sharing what AMI stands for?
Oh, yes, it's the area median income.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying poverty line is too low, 50% of AMI would be better?
I think so, yes. I think, well, what I've seen is 60%, 60 to 80% of the AMI, I think it's considered very low to low income. So I think that would be a good indicator.
Mm-hmm.
So just to summarize, using 50% of AMI is a better indicator than the poverty line.
Yes, because I'm assuming that federal or poverty line is a federal guideline, and I know that that's really, really low, especially for the cost of living here in the area. So I think AMI is a better indicator overall.
Yeah, you said, after you said 50%, you said 60 to 80%, which that would align with our lowest kind of income category at which TRPA provides incentives. So does that seem like 60 to 80% is kind of maybe the category we should aim for?
I think yes, or maybe saying like below the 80% AMI.
So
Below 80% as one of the priority communities.
So we're saying below 80 instead of 50, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I really agree that that's a very crucial distinction for our region, that, we're unique in that our entry level pay is higher than a lot of places, but our cost of living is much, much higher, and it doesn't measure up. So, our social services work, we find that who we consider vulnerable, and meeting our criteria is oftentimes higher than federal income lines.
Yeah, and well, like I said, 80% is usually what's considered, like if someone lives below the 80% AMI or earns below 80% of the area median income, that's what's called low income. And then if it's 60%, I believe it's very low income, or below 50, sometimes it's 50, sometimes 60. So I don't know if we would want to say below very low income or just low income. So that's the, I guess that would be the distinction between the 80% or 60%. But I think definitely below 80% at least.
Well, the benefit of the higher percentage is more people could be helped, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe that should be our starting point. Do we all agree with that?
I agree, yes.
Yeah.
Karen, is it possible for us to get chat access though, so that we can agree on stuff without having to unmute?
Oh, so you guys cannot chat to each other?
No.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can get that. I'll have to email Catherine. Okay, good to know. Because I was actually going to ask you guys I'm sorry, I was remiss. We skipped the introduction element, and I was hoping that you guys could just say to each other, like whether you're on the Tahoe Living Working Group or what group you represent, so that everybody knows who each other is. So I was going to have you do that in the chat, but let's see if anybody else has anything else to say on these this discussion. If not, maybe you guys could just quickly introduce yourselves to each other.
Well, I kind of do a little bit of both. Antonio
Yeah.
Valdez, managing attorney with Legal Services in Northern California, and our organization has been a part of the Tahoe the working group, and then just a bit of. I just want to make sure in using AMI, it is consistent with how HCD measures what is very low income and so forth, just to kind of be consistent with the different housing elements. And I'm trying to look it up really quick, and I just cannot remember if they use the federal poverty limit or if they use area median income. If anyone happens to know that off the top of their head. Otherwise, I'm very much in favor of changing that, but just for consistency's sake, I think it would be important to have the housing element definitions and what we use to be similar.
Yeah, let's check that. I'm pretty sure that the California uses the categories that Denise was mentioning, like 30% to 30%, then 30 to 60, 60 to 80, but we can check. Does anybody else have any comments? Okay, so Flint, when the group calls on us, hopefully I'm going to be able to, I think Catherine might need to call on us because I'm not in the room anymore. So then Flint, will have you unmute so the room can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for being the note taker and the report out.
Hopefully I captured these accurately. I guess we'll find out.
Let's see, I'm gonna message Catherine. Oh, 2-minute warning. Okay, do you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves with 2 minutes? Maybe we could start with Denise.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Denise Vega Zarate. I'm the housing coordinator with Sierra Community House, and I am part of the community partner group.
Erica, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Erica Gonzalez. I am part of oh crap. The cultivating, what group am I part of?
The Tahoe Living
I'm
Working Group.
Yeah. I'm just a community member, but a lawyer by trade.
Cool. Flint, maybe you could be next.
Yes, my name's Flint Brenton. I live in North Lake Tahoe. I am part of the St. Francis of Assisi, St. Vincent de Paul team that supports the North Lake Tahoe region.
Thanks. Daniel?
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Huerta. I'm with the California Tahoe Conservancy. I work primarily in the land bank and development rights and part of the Tahoe Living Working Group.
Thanks. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Bowman. I'm Director of Legal Assistance, Crisis Intervention, and Family Support Advocacy at Sierra Community House and part of the living group.
Thanks. And Antonia, you already introduced yourself, and I can't remember if you said that you're on the community partner group.
Yeah, it is a community partner group. I was I get confused on the two, but yeah, community partner group.
Cool. And then we have Laura Alvarez. I'm not sure if Laura's participating.
Good morning. My name is Laura Alvarez. I'm now from the Family Resource Center Promotora.
Great, thanks. And Laura, you're the Family Resource Center is on the community partner group too for everybody.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so I think they're gonna call on us soon, and then the chat should be working. I don't know if anybody wants to test it. Hopefully we can all see each other now if we do chat. Let me see. Yeah, and maybe someone else should test it who's not a host. Okay, can you guys see Erica and Flint's? No, you probably. Oh, can everybody see Erica's chat that says looks good?
Yes, I can see Erica's.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if you want to chat to the group, just make sure you have to select the little blue button and make sure it says everyone, not hosts and panelists.
Okay, great.
All right. All right, I'm gonna get Catherine to let us hear the room.
Aaron, quick question.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Do we have any breaks in between now and lunch or throughout the day?
I can look at this
I think just
presentation.
because I was trying to find.
You may just need to hop off and take a break if you need to, which is totally fine. Let me see.
Okay, everyone. Folks online hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna get started. Looks like y'all had a good, rich conversation. We're gonna get started, folks in the back. If you can hear me, clap your hands. No, I'm just kidding. So folks online, let's start with you. What did you talk about? How many groups were you split out into? Was there just one group?
We are just on one, and Flint is going to report out for us.
Okay, awesome. Go for it, Flint.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll go through this quickly. And if
Oh,
anyone,
by the way, don't feel rushed. We have plenty of time. And what we're gonna do is we'll have the report out from individual groups. And then we can have, if it makes sense at that point, have like a larger group conversation afterwards, okay? So, a couple minutes, Flint, but yeah, don't feel too rushed about it.
okay, great. Well, we have a great group of folks that were contributing. And for those of you in our group, the online group, if you want to add anything to what I have transcribed here, feel free to jump in. So we started our conversation around talking about the community priority zones. And so really there were three major comments. First, Dan mentioned that we would want to keep these zones in mind when developing priorities regarding housing and workforce housing. We should know what the priorities are and who benefits, like be somewhat granular as to linking the benefits to the potential beneficiaries. Second, Karen asked the group to look at priorities for housing, which was previously, in our CPG, as you know, looked at transportation. Now we're kind of transitioning this to looking at housing as well. And, the topic came up, 3 or more are required to be a priority zone. Question really is, does it need to be 3 or could it be 2? And then Erica brought up the idea of the law, that applicable law maybe less of a fit for housing and the analysis of relevant housing issues and needs than for transportation. And but she made the general comment that the law needs to look beyond specifics and at the bigger picture around overall need. So those were the 3 primary comments around community priority zones. Does anyone on the team want to add to that, or are there any questions? Okay, if not, and the next topic was priority communities and what do you like or dislike about how they were set up. So again, we have 3 criteria that are required. Should 2 be enough? And we thought maybe it should be. The second point that came up is certain groups have very different needs. So do we need to take those needs into consideration when we start aligning groups? Or if we have groups that have very different needs that are getting aligned, is that really reflective of how we could benefit our stakeholders? Next question came up, is there any missing criteria? And the point was made, yes, overcrowding seems to be a missing criteria. And then to piggyback on that concept, one additional sub criteria might be, we talked about households that have 0 cars. What about large households that do not have enough cars? And we don't believe that large households that do not have enough cars should be a separate criteria. It should be a sub criteria under overcrowding. Erica brought up the idea of what about renters as a group? Should we consider them as a major stakeholder block? Denise brought up the idea of using AMI or area median income instead of poverty level as an indicator. And she suggested that a reading below 80% of AMI is the best indicator, right? So we kind of talked about a range of 60 to 80, but we kind of agreed that if we start with 80, more people could benefit. So we thought that was a good starting point. And then Elizabeth brought up the idea that the criteria that we're looking at and discussing is higher than what federal income requirements might be. So those were the 7 points that came up around priority communities and what we like or dislike. So does the group have any additions or edits or questions about any of those? Okay, that's it.
Excellent. Glenn, I could tell you've done this before. Very well organized. Thank you. How about we start with this side of the room, right side of the room?
Sure, can we bring up that chart where you outline your methodology?
Sure, the indicators,
Sure,
yeah.
yeah. Talk to that.
The list of indicators.
No. It's 25.
Okay.
So that's the criteria, that's our next area of discussion, but there was another chart where it has basically your methodology.
Oh. Oh, okay.
We'll come
It
back to
might
this.
be that. Might be that.
That one?
Yeah, that's the one, right?
Not exactly, but I think.
Okay.
So we think you're asking us to comment basically on, the content of this area here. That's what this first question is asking.
Mhm.
And we think, overall, yeah, it's pretty good, but in line with the feedback that you got from the CPG, are there other areas that could be created for distribution of the resources?
Mhm.
Instead of, they use the word segregate, but instead of bounding the investment to the yellow areas, are there other areas that investment could be applied, thereby redistributing some of the population throughout the basin?
Mhm.
Any other thoughts on the third one?
Yeah, that's good, and that led to the conversation of preserving existing housing stock, and this fit very well with, I think, that concept. But for new, where we're gonna build new housing, maybe we also need to consider the fact that we don't want to, and that was one of the criticisms that came up with the public group. Focus all of the affordable housing in these concentrated neighborhoods, but look for other neighborhoods where affordable housing might be appropriate as well. That's the geographic dispersion.
Very good, very interesting, and yeah, very interesting distinction there between those two. Preserving the housing stock and building new housing.
We go
Great.
forward to chart 25, I think that's the next one.
That's the previous one, right?
Yeah, this one right here. These are your criteria one. We like the criteria with a couple of comments. One, we're not sure that you need to break out youth/students under 18. We assume that they would be part of a household. Household living under, either under a poverty line or not. And then we're not sure that that final bullet there is really inclusive of the population that we have in the Tahoe Basin, specifically our Hispanic population. It seemed like it's a generic term that could be perhaps better focused.
Okay.
But this is probably where you're gonna be looking for surrogates anyway. Surrogate measures.
Potentially. Yeah. Yeah, BIPOC is sort of became more popularized during sort of the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement as a way to center Black and Indigenous populations in particular. But still calling out people of color as well. So that would, Hispanics, Latinos would be included in this definition and are included in this definition. But you're right, in terms of the largest population here, at a quote unquote disadvantage is the Latino community. So in terms of racial ethnicity within that category. So good point. Anything else? All right, how about, let's start with y'all.
Okay. We combined some of ours between the two different questions. So a big thing that we did talk about was lining up the different boundary zones. So we talked about the different boundaries between bonus unit boundary, the town centers and the CPZs are all different, and lining those up.
The CPZs and town centers?
Yeah, and the bonus unit boundary.
Oh, bonus units.
So they're all different.
You're getting ahead of us there, guys. Come on.
Sorry.
It's all right, it's all right.
I think similar to the first group sort of mentioned it, is we talked about a lot of these, the priority communities are where people are currently living, not that where they want to live. So that's a distinction that we want to make is how do we expand some of those boundaries to not just continuing to create housing and saying you only can live in these areas because that's where you live already. We talked a little bit too about the distinction between where land is available, as Jean was mentioning, for new construction versus where those incentives are, if it's in a town center or it could be publicly owned land that's outside in some of these boundary zones. And then and then one of the other things was talking about future potential and not the current potential, which is what I was sort of just alluding to. And then we talked about the current multifamily zones and how do we include some of those areas? Because in the current boundaries for the CPZs, they're not really inclusive of a lot of the multifamily or SROs. around the lake.
All right.
Anything else?
Or anything you want to elaborate on a little bit more?
Maybe if I could just briefly add, I think, you know, a lot of these priority zones seem to make sense for transportation, less so than housing incentivization. And I had suggested focusing on proximity to transit and land use capability to broaden the areas where we incentivize housing development in recognition that we have been too restrained in the past for where housing development can happen.
Great, thank you. Next group.
Alright, so, looks like you guys number of points all around, 1 and 2 discussion items. And so,
feel free to just second, you know, anything that folks said too.
Yeah.
But
so, sorry, my phone's vibrating. Throughout the lake, we need housing, right? And you have these two kind of the polars, you know, north and south, and they're pretty close together, kind of areas where it's, you know, it seems like it was easy to just define these areas because that's where there was a pool of people. And much to your point, like, it's not like they necessarily wanted to live there. It might have been a necessity for various reasons. Maybe it was a blighted area, it was able to become people who moved in there. But we need to service all of the lake, and not everyone even works in town centers. Maybe they work at houses or other things or move around throughout the day. So trying to get more zones around the lake. Transit does exist around the lake too. It's not like we only have buses in the north and buses in the south. Like there's, you know, Tahoe City has a huge, you know, transportation center right there. And, you know, Homewood and like walkability, right? And people riding their bikes. So, when we look at like the phase 2 amendments, they were helping housing where they're in density, where there's stormwater systems. But we can't just put stormwater systems all over the whole lake, at least day 1. So it would be good to kind of figure out some areas where it would make sense to hit those areas first. Problem being that, you know, would certain people in that neighborhood not like those storm systems because it's gonna then mean density? And then, you know, I noted that the lawyers kind of decide a lot of this, like we may decide what feels right for the community, but then the lawyers are gonna say, well, no, this is the safest path, or this is what's, you know, gonna get us to the finish line. Watered down. So, you know, the CPZs are too constraining for these purposes, it seems. I mean, we need housing as the short of it, and to just try to put people of one type or one types into certain areas doesn't seem right. We need it all over. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Last group.
Is that you?
Yeah.
They were drinking the whole time.
Yeah, you could tell.
Actually debate about the usefulness of CPZs in general, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, real quick, I'm sorry. For the folks online, can y'all hear everything that's being said by the groups?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. I just want to make sure you're not missing out on a conversation. Okay, great.
Yeah, so we had a lot of debate about whether CPZs should be utilized at all. And just kind of knowing that there is this need for housing, I think some of us feel like wherever the site conditions warrant that, or wherever the market maybe warrants that, are the locations that should be utilized for housing. And then others of us sort of feeling like, oh, there is a benefit of having CPZs, especially for maybe some of those programs to unlock existing housing stock, or to keep people in housing stock, that those programs can kind of focus on priority communities in terms of where we put funds, when those funds are available, and when the jurisdictions can prioritize that. Also understanding that not every jurisdiction does prioritize that or have those funding systems available. So
Mhm.
we also had a pretty lengthy discussion about the town center boundaries in general, and just recognizing that there are a lot of sensitive lands in town center boundaries that aren't suitable for development, and maybe areas right outside of town centers where there is multifamily housing and they are more suitable. So is it worth having more of a broader discussion about what are those opportunity sites, and can we sort of modify the town centers based on the best opportunities for housing? Taking into consideration some of those other criteria as well.
And when you say sensitive, I think you said, areas suitable for housing or sensitive sites, are you talking about environmentally sensitive or?
Environmentally
Okay,
sensitive. Yeah,
gotcha.
there's a lot of environmentally sensitive land in town center boundaries that would never be developed for housing, and so it's like, why put that in town center when you might have other lands more suitable for housing that are not in those boundaries, and can kind of look at how that's drawn and just make sure that the sites that are in town centers are suitable. So looking at really those opportunity sites. So again, are there environmentally suitable sites right outside of town center boundaries? And also, are they close to transit or other things? Although some of us felt like those criteria didn't need to be applied. So our commentary ran the gamut.
Yeah, good. Awesome. So curious for the various different groups. Was there something that you heard from one of the other groups that really resonated with you? You know, something that you wanted to kind of build on, a new connection? So, go ahead. Yeah.
I forget what group it was. It might have been your group or the online group. They talked about like, and we sort of alluded to it too with the multiple different boundaries and everything. The less of these things we sort of have, the easier it is to develop.
Less of what things?
Like the different criteria.
Less criteria?
So some of those bonus, like the bonus unit boundary, the town center, the CPZs, we should be taking that into consideration as data points. But when we're actually developing, it's like, because we've already had that in a lot of our area plans, it was like, this zone's for employee housing, this zone's for public employees, this zone's for multifamily, this is single family. And that created a lot of restrictions as is. And so some of that can be just used, like, I think a lot of the criteria for the CPZs is important to understand how it changes over time, but not in allowing certain types of housing.
Yep.
Eric Young, I think maybe listening to everybody, thanks everybody, that was fun to listen to. If there's a little bit of a theme, maybe that I picked up, that it's a awareness of boundaries and what the boundary means, and whether, you know, what it means to be outside of the boundary versus in a boundary. And just sort of a theme of wanting to be super careful about drawing new boundaries, and, you know, we've already got a lot of them. So I think that might be a theme I heard around everybody, maybe.
So more criteria and less boundaries. Criteria focus, not boundary focus.
So not more boundaries, but making sure the criteria is on point. Yeah.
Something that this back group said, I don't think is what they meant or anything. They're talking about building in sensitive land, but it triggered to me, I mean, being an environmental and planning agency, why don't we just take the worst polluter areas, like what communities are the problem childs, and try to develop incentives in those areas. They're probably gonna be areas that have, you know, light and stuff like that, but if they have bad systems and bad stuff, you probably know who your problem childs are, like who pollutes the most, right? What if we look at those areas and try to see how do we, because with a new project, you have to evaluate everything.
And you're saying incentives for them to clean up their environmental act, if you will, and the carrot would be more housing units, or what's the carrot? Funds?
I don't know.
Okay.
You know, what I'm just saying is, why don't we prioritize, like you were saying, criteria, like if the criteria is a good and healthy lake, why don't we look to, if we're trying to designate areas, why don't we designate areas that are most polluters, problem areas? And then whatever that means, incentives, like easy to build, bigger, less fees, whatever.
Yep.
Chris, we have a hand raised online.
Yeah, I was gonna go online. Yeah,
Okay.
great, thank you. Yep, folks online? And we'll go to Nick after that.
Yeah, this is Flint. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, so I think one of the common themes was making sure we have clarity around what we're solving for, whether it's housing
Yeah.
or transportation or both. And then aligning, distinguishing criteria, what is relevant for both and what is relevant for each. I think just getting clarity on the front end will be helpful as we proceed in our discussion.
Love it. Nick?
One of the challenges that came to my mind when I heard Rob's point there is when we think about which areas pollute the most, we're not always talking about like factories dumping sort of poisons into the lake as much as places that were developed that never should have been developed in the first place.
Yeah.
A lot of like low lying sensitive lands have been overdeveloped. And so I would want to make sure that we're not saying, let's develop those more. And sometimes you need to actually like.
Yeah,
shift away.
I get that, but I mean, we have to look at it with the eco lens of like, what does that mean? Not just like, what 7-story tall buildings and top Ps.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Awesome conversation. Great way to kick off the day. How are we doing on time? Should we get it moving? Yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yes, this is awesome. Thank you so much for this great round of conversation. You got me thinking. I think you probably got the folks behind me thinking too. So good jumping point off. And then we'll have one actually final comment from Erica. Erica?
Yeah, I want to be careful with the conversations of pollution and then thinking about that in conversation with the community priority zones. Historically, more populated zones have been allocated to marginalized communities, and I just want to be careful, and I think that's why it's really important to keep the community priority zones in mind, and also recognize that how that impacts incentives, especially as it turns to environmental issues, how those are actually interrelated in a lot of different ways. And I really want to be mindful of that. I don't know if there's much more to add to that, but I don't think we can ignore the historical ways that certain populations have been pushed to locations that tend to be quote unquote bigger polluters.
So thinking about the unintended consequences of some of these adjustments. Yeah, and I hear you about sort of when we talk about flood prone areas or areas that are polluted and so on and so forth, like those are the areas that were traditionally and still currently in many places inhabited by low income people of color. So anything else you want to call out, Erica, or anybody else online? All right, awesome. So with that, let's go to the next slide. I think this one might be mine. I think next one after that. So yes, we're gonna get now into growth management and town centers. So we already got a reference about town centers and the connection with CPZs. Perfect segue, thank you. So now we're gonna investigate and discuss the impacts of current housing policies related to guiding housing in the basin towards town centers. And as I mentioned before, this will then fold into the conversation about that intersect between the CPZs and town centers and other areas of to manage growth. So next slide. I think this now goes over to Jacob.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so one of the core tenets of the 2012 regional plan is to direct growth into town centers. And so the idea is that by concentrating the remaining development, we have this growth cap in Tahoe, so we have a limited amount of development. By concentrating that remaining development in these smaller areas, we're better able to manage the impact of that development. And it's intended to both support rehabilitation of those centers, which are historically, like, as Rob pointed out, some of these areas that have produced the most pollution and sediment runoff into the lake. So to rehabilitate those areas and make them more environmentally, I'm missing the word right now, perform better environmentally, and to protect environmental resources outside centers by preserving those areas. So next slide, please. Okay, so the regional plan calls out redeveloping town centers as a major priority. So these town centers historically contain the most of the region's non-residential services. So these aren't necessarily historically residential areas. These are historically commercial areas. And they were identified as major sources of pollutants, particularly like fine sediment and runoff into the lake. So highly developed areas. To Sophia's point, oftentimes these are low-lying, environmentally sensitive areas that were developed, 60, 70 years ago, in a way that created pollutant issues. So targeting reinvestment in these centers could improve environmental conditions. That's the idea of the regional plan, that we redevelop these areas in a more environmentally sensitive way, these areas that have already been somewhat damaged by development. And redeveloping in a more compact manner could also reduce vehicle trips, so that reduces pollution, and create more opportunities for economic and community development, these being centers of community, centers of the economy in Tahoe. And this is pretty much consistent with regional planning work you see across California and across the country, guiding growth into existing urban areas to create more walkable and transit-served communities, and thus preventing sprawl elsewhere. So pretty standard planning paradigm here. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some maps of our town centers. With some, regional map and then more detailed North and South Shore map. So as I mentioned, these are historically largely commercial centers, so great for mixed use redevelopment when we're talking about housing. They include, so in identifying these town centers, the Code of Ordinances also includes community design elements, as well as the area plans include community design elements aimed at meeting those town center goals of redevelopment and concentrating growth. They also aim to transfer development rights into town centers from sensitive areas outside of town centers. So this is getting into our development rights and our growth management system. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so getting from that policy into practice, the code has a number of rules aimed at redirecting growth into town centers. And so these include allowing higher densities in town centers, allowing greater land coverage, so that creates more capacity for growth there. Oftentimes, a lot of these properties in town centers are already pretty well covered with pavement and structures from that legacy development. And it also includes awarding bonus units for transfers into centers. So if you have some development rights on a property outside of a center that's a sensitive property, then you can get bonus units. You can get extra development rights for transferring that into the town center. Next slide, please. And so the impact of these policies it's been about 12 years now since we call it the 2012 regional plan, but it was actually adopted in 2013. Funny thing. So it's been 12 years that we've been implementing this stuff. And in the this is looking at 2023. So in the 10 years following the regional plan's adoption, 170,000 square feet of coverage was transferred to town centers from sensitive areas. Development rights have moved towards town centers as well. So this practice of directing development rights to town centers has had a real impact towards those original goals. And so with that, I will hand it to Eric for a little more.
Hey, good morning, everyone. You can go to the next slide. My name is Eric Yerkovich. I'm a principal at Ramey and Associates. We're part of the consultant team helping TRPA through this phase of cultivating communities. My job is to talk a little bit about a different policy that's been implemented statewide in California that looks at how we facilitate growth within our communities. In 2018, the state of California adopted AB 686, what's called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or AFFH, as some of you may have heard. Is anyone familiar with this state law or policy? Just a show of hands, we got a couple Californians in here who know about it. Yeah, okay, couple. Essentially, the bill expanded on some federal protections that were outlined in the Fair Employment and Labor Housing Act. And it requires all local jurisdictions and public agencies in California to facilitate and address housing disparities overall. In particular, for California jurisdictions, it created a bunch of new requirements in their housing element process to look at affordable and fair housing within their communities. This includes doing things like analyzing patterns of historic segregation in communities, identifying contributing factors to what caused those disparities, and then establishing goals, policies, and implementation activities to address those fair housing considerations. Okay, next slide. One of the key issues that relates to this conversation that the AFFH tries to address is the concentration of higher density housing in what are considered to be lower resource communities, tend to be lower income, have lower education levels. As Jacob mentioned, kind of guiding growth has been sort of the dominant planning paradigm for a lot of time. So we've been slowly pushing growth into town centers, into transit areas. That higher density development is often been pushed into lower income and lower resource areas all across the state of California and other places too. So what AFFH tries to do is to rethink that paradigm a little bit and talk about where we place kind of higher density housing in order to provide opportunities for lower income families to have better access to educational outcomes, economic outcomes, as well as better environmental quality. And I think Erica was talking about a bit of that earlier today. So on the right-hand side is what's called the TCAC Opportunity Zones map, and TCAC stands for the Tax Credit Allocation Committee. It's a California organization. They update these maps every year. And what they do is they evaluate every census tract in the state of California by subregion, and then assign them an opportunity zone. So on the map, you can see the darker blues are the higher opportunity zones, kind of the teal colors are the moderate opportunity zones, and then kind of the olive colors and yellows are the lower resource areas. Now, the thing to add additionally is that this map's really important for affordable housing developers. You can get access to tax credits, or have better likelihood to get tax credit allocations to help meet gap financing for projects. Next slide. So here are just a few of the variables that are used to determine those opportunity zones. So these are really basically broken into income poverty, education, employment, and environmental burden. Again, these are assessed statewide, but then they are localized to different subregions within the state. In California, on the Tahoe side, these are considered to be the rural counties, so you're kind of normalized against other rural counties in California. And here is a map that shows the sort of the interaction between those opportunity zones as well as the town center. So the town centers are kind of highlighted in red. This is the Kings Beach area. here, and you can see how it overlaps with sort of the moderate and higher resource areas here within the Tahoe Basin overall. And I think just to note that the data is analyzed at the census tract level. So there's a lot of the areas that are outside of kind of the more urbanized parts of the Tahoe region that are showing up here as blue or darker blue because they're just full census tracts and not kind of clipped to the urbanized geographies of the Tahoe region. Here is a map that shows the town centers as compared to, again, those opportunity zones overall. And here, this is just the South Lake. Here you can see the interaction is instead of the town centers with those higher resource areas, here you can see the interaction with those kind of lower resource areas and moderate resource areas. So this is, again, this is pretty consistent with what we see in a lot of communities around the state and what California and the Housing and Community Development Department are asking folks to do through their housing element process is to look at how we can encourage and facilitate housing, not just in those lower and moderate resource areas, but also expand that to think about how we can provide those opportunities in the higher resource areas to really to promote this upward mobility of lower income families. The next slide. So this is just really a thought exercise to tee up our next conversation that we're going to do in small groups where we talk a little bit about the interaction between those CPZs and the town centers and the residential bonus unit boundaries, which were already brought up during the previous conversation. But just for 10 or 15 minutes, we want to get a sense of how you think these town centers really align with TCAC opportunity area zones, and whether or not you think even these resource areas really apply within the Tahoe region. And then whether these are really higher resource areas that are identified. These are all questions to think about. And then what do you think the town center, do you think the town centers are where we want to focus the housing policy? And I think that conversation started during the last small groups and will continue during the next section. But we just want to give you all just a few minutes to reflect on this for a second. And we're just going to open this up for a large group discussion to talk about any of these questions. I'm going to turn maybe to the online folks first. And if there's anyone who wants to share about any of these questions, maybe if you raise your hand, we'll get you first in the queue, and then we'll go to the folks in the room.
Are there no hands raised online?
Okay, great. Anyone in the room to share?
Sure. Can you put up one of the charts again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Which one would you like to
The
see?
one that seemed like it was on the California side, you saw a high concentration of dark blue.
In the beach.
Yeah, this one would be good. This one here, it doesn't have, does it identify your TCs?
The town centers are not shown on this overall map. When we zoom into the North Shore and the South Shore, you can kind of see that too. So if you go to the next slide. This is the North Shore. You can see that interaction between the town center outlined in red.
Right.
And those TCAC
So
opportunities.
the previous one would be good to talk to.
Okay.
So is the question, how does the red bordered area align with the concept of a TCAC?
Yeah, how do you think they align? And do you even think that these TCAC resource areas are valuable to think about within the Tahoe Basin? What might be different about this geography than others?
And the blue represents areas, opportunities, right, where they want to they're motivating people to concentrate resources in those blue areas.
That's right. So those areas have, through the data and analysis, have some of the highest incomes, the best educational outcomes, some of the best economic outcomes, and some of the lowest pollution burden.
Okay.
So affirmatively furthering fair housing asks that we look at those areas for moving housing into because they've been positively correlated with better life outcomes for lower income families over time.
Okay.
Great questions. Nick and then Eric.
Do you have any maps of transit service, whether existing or planned, that we could see into or mentally align to these?
We don't have them handy. That's something we certainly pull up from the RTP.
Perhaps I just encourage everyone, if you know, just keep an eye out for like where those
Yeah.
transit lines. exist.
Yeah. Eric?
So the California jurisdictions are compelled by a new rule to respond in their housing elements.
That's correct.
And perhaps eventual codes and regulations. I'd be curious to hear what the experience of the California jurisdiction staff is in their response to that and what their initial feelings are about how TRPA's regulatory schemes are helping or creating barriers for what is gonna have to be their response. I mean, you know, not that long ago, we had a really simple thing of having to allow ADUs. And so that was from a Nevada jurisdiction. That was really fun to watch. But this looks like it might be even more fun to watch. And so I'm just really curious about what the California staff is experiencing and thinking about how they're gonna move forward with TRP's rules and what they may be asking for. I mean, this is kind of, are you gonna have to come forward and ask TRPA for some consideration in order to make this happen? Or can you work with the current regulatory scheme? That's what I'm most curious about right now.
Does anyone want to respond? And then Rob, I think you have your hand up. I don't know if there's anyone online as well.
I mean, I can say, Jessica's not here, but, for Placer, we haven't had to do this yet. Our next housing element cycle will start in 2 years. So we'll be incorporating it then, as much as, to the extent that we incorporate this in the basin, I imagine to demonstrate compliance with AFFH, there would have to be potentially some changes because these are not the typical areas right now where we are trying to concentrate housing.
Yeah, very interesting.
And before Rob goes, like some of the experiences that I've had with working with jurisdiction on zone housing elements is that we've had to find and rezone sites in higher opportunity zones that haven't maybe historically been the location where cities are guiding growth for particularly for multifamily development. So those might be commercial corridors around single family neighborhoods or similar to identify those
Well,
opportunities.
that doesn't seem like a small thing to me when it comes to overlapping with TRPA. That seems like potentially explosive. Like we're gonna have to really think about remapping to some extent in order to come into compliance. Is that too dramatic?
It might be a little, I think it's an important consideration in thinking about where those opportunities lie. Remapping everything, I'm not sure that's necessary. We haven't found that in jurisdictions, but they are key to find those opportunities outside of the traditional kind of lower resource zones. And then I think Rob and then Jean.
We also have a hand raised.
I know we have a hand raised online, so Rob, Jean, and then Flint.
I mean, I think it's complicated, right? Because, you know, in the previous exercise, we were saying we need to spread out stuff, right? But, at the same time, we're not done with those other areas that we need to focus on too. So, I mean, we have only so much resources and ability, and it takes a long time to do things. And in town centers, for instance, that is where growth and density is planned to go, and we're set up for that. And to say, oh, well, no, like we have opportunities to kind of put the same problems in these blue areas. That's what it sounds like. It's like we have opportunity to kind of blight those other areas. Like we need to focus and conquer. We need to spread it out around the lake more. But it seems like what this kind of premise is that, oh, well, you know, like, how do we refine those areas that still need help? You know, because they don't have stormwater. So it's like, let's just go move over to the blue. That sounds like sprawl, right? Like, let's go move over to the blue area. And then the other area is just going to still have the same problem. It's going to be polluting. We're not fixing it. You know, we're just pushing the problem somewhere else. And then like 20 years later, like, oh, that strategy wasn't right. Like, here's this another, you know. That's kind of what's going on in my head.
Great, thanks, Rob. Gene?
To me, the TCAC opportunities, that's aspirational. It sounds great, wonderful goals, but again, it goes back to the conversation we had in the earlier conversation.
not all in what you were just saying, not all of the sites within these dark blue are appropriate for affordable housing.
Right.
Right? So again, it goes to, let's think about what are the criteria that are relevant for affordable housing? What are good sites for affordable housing? And bureaucratic exercises like this, unfortunately, may drive resources where they shouldn't be, right? So that's my concern, and reminds me of a conversation when I was in Southern California. I was meeting with the mayor, talking about a site that they have designated for affordable housing. And I said, we have a great project, we really, it's a good, and he said, that was an exercise we had to go through. We labeled this as affordable housing, but that will never be built. So
right.
That's a problem with like these sort of aspirational exercises. They don't match reality.
And I think what the state of California has found with the housing element exercise in identifying sites and locations for both housing and affordable housing is that they've tried to move beyond the paper exercise of it to making it more real and identifying sites that are more likely to actually happen as housing. So, if you look back at housing elements in the past and their sites inventories, most of those sites never changed and they would be in inventory after inventory. You can't do that anymore. They're asking to make it more real so that we address those housing needs. I'm gonna go to Flint next and then.
And actually, I was just wondering, before you go to Flint, could we put the question back
Oh, yeah.
up? Because I know Jessica's out, and I think that TCAC areas that Jessica might want to weigh in on this, because when we were crafting the grant, like we talked about how like some of the state criteria is just not right for Tahoe. So I just
Totally.
want to make sure that everybody gets a chance.
Great.
And then, yeah.
Thanks.
Just one point of clarification about the maps. Those are census tracts, right?
Yeah.
So the census tracts are based on population. And a lot of those areas that you see in, for example, dark blue are not necessarily populated or like sparsely populated, right? So it's not, I don't think those maps are saying, hey, put growth up in those, in the forested mountainous areas in those blue zones, right? Like it's just, it happens to be just the census tract, the unit of measurement geographically that we have in terms of the US Census. So just to kind of put that out there.
Thanks, Chris.
Might be better just kind of look at the developable areas that you can see there, the street grids and thinking about that instead.
Okay, Flint first and then Rob and then TJ. Flint.
Yeah, thank you. So this is super interesting. What I think would be appropriate would be as we work on our own analysis and we determine these high priority communities where we think housing and or transportation are in greatest need and most relevant, and that given the criteria we have, it would be interesting to go back to whoever the governing body is that creates this tax credit allocation community map to get alignment. So the question is, one of the questions here is, do they align? Like, do their town centers align with the TCAC opportunity, given the as-is situation? In some ways, in some situations it does, some situations it doesn't. I think it would be really interesting for us to create what we think are the priority communities, and then try and go back to this governing body to see if we can get alignment so they can support the communities that we think are important that are not on their map. So let's be proactive and go back to them and try and get alignment rather than react to what they have, I guess is my point.
Great, thanks, Flint. Rob, TJ, and then we put Jessica on the spot a
I
second.
just want to highlight like what Nick was maybe getting to of like, how do we overlay things, right? Because like building out in the forest doesn't make sense as blue, but maybe there are some blue areas that are along, like within a quarter mile, I'd say, or an eighth of a mile with transit that still isn't like a wetland, but it's kind of like needs love. That could be a great area that we're trying to hone in on to get some more, love around the lake. So I just want to kind of clean up what I was saying.
Great, thanks, Rob. TJ.
My question is kind of about how the different data points that are used to identify these opportunity zones, how are they weighted and calculated? The thing that popped to my mind is that And I'm not really sure that identifying where there are a lot of multi-million-dollar second homes really presents that much of an opportunity for local people with family housing.
Jessica, you want to go first, or yeah, you have your hand? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so when you go on the websites for any one of these maps, the state, they list out the specific methodology and how they're determined. So it's helpful because this is a big one, and then, the one that maps out the disadvantaged populations, those ones show you how they're weighted and you can break it down. So exactly what Chris was saying about the census tract. So in the city of South Lake Tahoe's housing element, one of our items is to engage with the state more about the problematic areas of these mapping tools that they're using, because the census tracts don't necessarily align with what's happening here. It makes sense in a lot of other areas where you're only building affordable housing in low-income areas because that's where developers can purchase the land. But in Tahoe, there's a lot of different nuanced issues that don't allow it to align. But I used to work for the state before, and so it's like a lot of times they're trying to figure out how they do. You're creating an imperfect tool for a large state with a lot of different geographic regions, and so that's why they chose the census tract method.
Touch on the point that you were saying, like, there's a lot of opportunity within wealthy communities, I mean, even lakefront for workforce housing. TRPA didn't allow a caretaker's unit on a parcel that was under 1 acre, unless it was already there. And many people that are building a second home would love to have a caretaker's unit. Most of these caretakers, I know them, like, they live on the lakefront. The principals aren't there all the time. They get to enjoy a house. They typically have like a 1,500 square foot or 1,200 square foot house that's at a lakefront. Yes, they have to work, but they also have other jobs in the area. There is an opportunity there where people would love to build these units, and it could help spread out some of that. And a lot of these homeowners really take care of these people pretty well. So
Great.
there's an opportunity there.
And when you talk about caretaker units, you're generally talking about accessory dwelling units just to kind of, so everyone kind of knows what we're on the same. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Any other thoughts online? I don't know if there's any other hands online. Okay. Gavin?
Yeah, as I'm trying to think of like a handful of things to make some concise, but we were chatting a little bit, and we didn't bring this up, but like the League of State Lake Tahoe, we've been promoting all development in town centers since 2012. Really want to see things concentrated for all the reasons that were explained in the opening here today. But I was talking, I was like, is there even room for this in the town centers? Like Emily and Jessica's first reaction is like, no, like for all our remaining development potential plus transferring from outlying extensive lands, like, is there even space in town centers for this? Like, probably not. And then that makes, and I really liked, I think Flint and a few people are talking about focusing more on criteria than on like map areas. I think that could be pretty confusing because you don't want to get down to like parcel level decisions, but I think there's something in there. I think like really trying to come up with like these criteria you want to see instead of so much a geographic area could be the way to go. And trying to map out like how much development do we need to, how much development do we want to put somewhere is the question. And like, what's the space we need for that? That's something that I think's kind of been missing or I haven't seen yet. I don't know if that's a big exercise or if that's something that's possible to look at, but yeah. And then the last piece was going back to the previous question, criteria. One thing that actually might be missing is land ownership and existing land use, if there is one. Because I mean, back to what everybody's talking about, saying, hey, identify all these lands, but then it turns out for whatever reason, it's not developable at all, whether it's market or environment or state ownership that comes with strings, stuff like that. So that might be I think that'd be an interesting criteria to look at too. Sorry, it's kind of a lot, but like, yeah, adding that to the criteria, really focusing on criteria and trying to figure out how much like space we need.
I mean, I think when we're thinking of high resource areas in the Tahoe Basin, it's so different from the rest of the state because we have such a very small amount of land that is actually good for development. Like it has good land capability. it's big enough to hold a development to make it pencil. It's not just like, you know, an eighth of an acre or something. And so I think our criteria for building, I'll say non-single family housing, has very different types of resources that we're looking at. So it's land capability, maybe near transit, maybe in or be close to an existing multifamily zone district. Maybe it's outside of an existing multifamily zone district. But I mean, I think what the state is looking at with like school districts and wealth is kind of a moot point when we're looking at high resource areas in the basin, because all the kids still go to the same school district, whether they're in that neighborhood or that neighborhood. So I think our high resources are very different.
Good. Nick, and then anyone else online?
I don't know, hands on my.
Looking at the map of the high TCAC scores, it just seems like an interesting reflection of rich people using their resources to do the wrong thing. You know, there's sort of a lot of people are aware or have the impression that people with more resources can get away with developing in more sensitive areas, or developing on the lakefront, or expanding and, you know, building further away from existing town centers because they don't need to rely on transit. And so those maps kind of reflect what has happened over the past decades, where people are building where we don't want to see development. And it's sensible for the state to say, okay, let's try and diversify neighborhoods. But also doing that by saying, okay, more people should build in those areas doesn't seem great to me.
That's just for getting tax credits for like affordable housing.
That makes sense, but the map seems to be like a reflection of where the rich people are. And the question I was sort of the thing I was observing is like, why are the rich people there? Not, why is it not more diverse already? It seems like perhaps those with more resources have been able to develop there. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a good place to encourage.
Great, thanks. And again, this is really about getting the conversation started. We're gonna talk next, and we can, I think, unless there's anyone else online. All right, then we're gonna go on to the next, and last module for the morning. But really, we're trying to get you to start thinking about, at the beginning, the who. So who are our priority communities? How are we trying to serve them and meet the housing need that we have? And now we're talking a little bit about the where, right? So where in the basin we're focusing our resources and efforts on encouraging and supporting the facilitation of housing to meet our housing need. You can get to the next one.
Hey, Eric, before I'm sorry to interrupt you, could we just, after this, could we do a break before the small groups?
Yeah, why don't we do it now? Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Why don't we take a 10-minute break now? We could all be back at 10:50. Does that sound fine?
Yeah.
10:50, we'll start up again at 10:50, including for those online. Yeah, that's fine.
We don't have anybody right now that we didn't.
Okay. Let's see.
All right, for folks who are online, we have finished our short break and we're gonna get started now. All right, is everyone ready? Okay, so here we go. So this is the last of our three kind of modules for this morning. So we talked a little bit in the first one about who we're planning for and where those folks live in the Tahoe Basin. And then the next module, that second module, we started to talk about the where the policies are guiding development. We talked about that California AFFH program. Thank you. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection between the town center kind of policy region-wide and its intersection with those community priority zone geographies we talked about in the first module. So those areas, particularly within the transportation program, that resources were being focused, some of those most sensitive populations within the region. We're also going to talk a little bit about once we talk about that interaction, some of the kind of the positives and negative things around meeting our housing need in some of these communities, what we should be thinking about, how we should be planning for growth. And we're going to introduce a little bit of a framework of equitable development that we use as we consider our housing and our growth management policies. So we keep it at the back of our mind as we're thinking about policies over the next couple of days. And I think this reflects a bit of the conversation that we had earlier. I think one of the members online noted some of the unintended consequences of kind of meeting our housing need and growth in particular neighborhoods. So we just want to keep this in the back of our mind as we start to look at particular ideas that have been identified in the briefing book about where and how we address changes within the growth management system, really to help meet our housing needs. Next slide. So you will have seen both of these maps. This is just combining the town centers with those community priority zones. Here we have a map just showing Kings Beach and Incline Village. So the community priority zones, again, these are those areas that we talked about as being priority communities, particularly in the transportation program for resources in those programs. And then the town centers being one of those primary areas where we're guiding growth through the development rights program, the regional plan, and the code of ordinances. So you can see here, there's overlap both in Kings Beach as well as Incline Village. Not 100% overlap, as we talked about earlier. There's a little bit of a difference in all of these boundaries overall. So the next slide shows the same geographies, but what we've done is added the residential bonus unit boundary. Again, this was brought up by one of the groups earlier on in the discussion. So again, we have the CPZ boundary, those community priority zones in blue, the town centers in red, but now we have this kind of orange boundary. So this is the residential bonus unit boundary. And in this area, there are additional incentives beyond just the town centers for housing. And those are about half mile from transit, from the town centers, and then from those multifamily areas. So we've got kind of this center area, the town center, where we're really trying to guide growth, but then there's also this area outside that has this incentive for residential development outside of it. Here again is the next slide, just shows the similar town centers and CPZs. And again, we have Tahoe City here, and we're showing South Lake as well. Again, blue is the CPZ boundaries and the red is those town center boundaries here. So again, there's no CPZs identified in the Tahoe City area, but you can see some identified within South Lake. And again, there's some overlap, not full overlap in these different boundaries. And then here again, we've added that residential bonus unit boundary. So again, while we're really focusing and a lot of the incentives, as Jacob mentioned earlier, are really targeted towards these town centers of where we're trying to guide growth. What you can see though, there are these additional incentives for bonus units that can be captured outside of these town center areas. So one of the things we talk a lot about in our planning work is that when we're guiding growth, we want to be thinking about both the positives and negatives of how we guide the growth and who it's benefiting and who it's burdening in the work that we do. So you all know that it could bring additional housing to those neighborhoods, jobs could move in with it, as well as infrastructure improvements, which will help those local communities. It can also help to balance out other health or educational inequities that you might see in some of those communities. However, there is sort of this risk that intensifying growth and guiding growth into particular areas can have unintended consequences. Those things can be rapid gentrification, loss of neighborhood character, strain on existing infrastructure. There are just a lot of dimensions and nuance that when we guide growth into particular areas, especially if there is a significant population of overburdened communities, that we want to make sure to consider as we do this work. So it's not to say that we shouldn't have a growth policy that guides development into certain places, but we also might want to couple that with additional policies that really help to reduce these negative effects of growth in certain areas. And so just for you to be thinking about, not just in this next 20-minute section when we go through and talk about growth and where it goes and how the boundaries are expanded and what additional types of policies we might want to consider, but as we think about the growth management system more broadly, and as we get into these kind of topic-specific conversations over the next 2 days, we want you to be thinking about how we can maximize benefits for those who most need housing and minimize the burdens that additional housing could have. So that could be related to ensuring there's economic opportunities for locals through local hire policies or similar. We'll make sure not to just build affordable housing, but how we can preserve existing naturally occurring affordable housing within some of these neighborhoods that exist that already meet the needs of some of the most under-resourced groups. How we can make sure that they have access to good quality transportation and mobility improvements so that they can get to the jobs and the economic opportunities, the schools, the amenities and the resources people need to have a good quality of life. And really just to make sure that these environments are good places to live, a high quality of life, and make sure that people have a good overall well-being. So with that kind of broad framework for you to think about these issues in, we're going to ask you to go, we're going to do a second small group discussion. So we're going to encourage you, and actually I'm going to encourage you to mix up a little bit, to grab a couple of you to grab your stuff and move around so you're working with a different group in this discussion. Unless you're online, if you can continue working with each other. Again, we'd like you to have someone who's identified as your note taker at your table, and then someone who's going to be your report out person at your table as well. You have a couple of maps of the CPZs and the town centers already on your table, as well as the discussion questions are there on your table as well. They're discussion questions number 3, I think. So we're going to ask you to consider really the relationship again between the town centers and these community priority zones. And we want you to think about what are some of the benefits and drawbacks of these overlapping geographies. Do you think that the town center or CPZ boundaries should be adjusted? We talked a little bit about this morning, so this is kind of a continuation of that discussion. And then additionally, what are some of the other practices that TRPA or local jurisdictions can consider to really minimize the burdens on those kind of most sensitive population and maximize the benefits for those people who most have the highest housing need? So with that, I'm going to ask folks inside in the room to maybe a few of you to get up and switch around tables and groups. To give you a second, we're going to give you about 20-30 minutes in your small groups for discussion.
Okay, can you guys online hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. So who would like to be the note taker and reporter outer this time? Does
Sure.
Flint? Okay, somebody else. Antonio, you want to do it?
Yeah, I could go ahead.
Thank you so much. Okay. So draft group agreements, maps, and questions are on the table. Okay, so you guys cannot see the table. Do you guys all have access to the links on the Tahoe Living webpage? If you want to flip through the presentation, there's a link to the presentation there. Does that work for everybody? If not, we can try to think of a different solution.
Could we just use the maps that we showed earlier and just share them with the folks that are on this Zoom call or Teams call, whatever it is?
So the problem is I cannot I don't have control of the screen because the people in the room are controlling the screen.
I see.
But do you guys have access to your web browser? And I can put the link in again. Actually, why don't I put the link to the presentation directly in the chat, and then you guys, will that work? Can you guys simultaneously look at the links on like the PowerPoint presentation online and also participate in the Zoom?
I
Do you
think
wanna-
so. Does
Okay.
does everyone agree with that? I think it should work.
Oh, wait, I put it on the wrong, here, wait, sorry. Link in there.
Yeah.
Okay, can you guys see that link?
Yes.
Okay. So if you click on that, you should be able to navigate to the maps. Is there anybody that can't see the PowerPoint? On the link that I just put in the chat? Okay. All right, let's start then. So Antonio, thank you for taking notes. So we're looking at what are the benefits and drawbacks of these geographies overlapping or not overlapping? So the town centers and the CPZs overlapping or not. Do you think town center or CPZ boundaries should be adjusted based on this information? If so, how? And what are some practices that TRPA can adopt to address potential impacts of housing or commercial and tourist growth on CPZs? And again, just the CPZs are the areas where there were 3 or more of those priority groups, where those populations were high.
I'll go first. I feel like I think it's definitely a benefit, I think, all around when they are overlapping. I think the only comment I think I'd have is if there's an area where town centers are not overlapping with the CPZ, I would think we would want to expand benefits of the town center into that CPZ zone since there's so much housing or housing development benefits for the town centers that the CPZs really would benefit from. So just like I'm only seeing the Sierra Tract as the only zone that that's not in the town center. So that would be my suggestion, I guess.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Dan's comments, I think we should definitely find in the town centers areas, if they're not included in the CPZ, we should work to include those areas that we think are relevant given the folks that meet the lower income criteria that we discussed earlier. The one thing we'd want to do, though, if we extend the reach into the town centers, is to prevent developers from being able to take advantage of those benefits to the detriment of our target stakeholders, right? I think that was one of the risks that were identified in a prior chart. But extending the reach, just make sure we're protecting the interest of the stakeholders and give them access to those benefits, which I think is similar to what you're saying, Dan.
Okay. Hi, Erica, welcome back. So yeah, we're just discussing these questions and I was encouraging everybody, since I don't have control of the slide that's showing, that I put a link in the chat of the PowerPoint so people can go and look at it on their own computer. If you have access to, like, if you can look at it at the same time as watching this PowerPoint presentation so you can see the maps.
And
Yeah.
the link that I have isn't a PDF, it's a Adobe. It wants me to log into Adobe. Is it possible to put in the link of the actual PDF?
Is everybody having that problem and with the link that I put in?
No, it's not a PDF. It's well, I guess it is a web presentation of a PDF, but I don't need to log into Adobe. I just scroll through it. If you just scroll down, Erica, hopefully it'll work for you just like it works for us. You don't have to open Adobe.
I do have to open Adobe.
Okay, wait, so Elizabeth, I just put, I don't know if this will work. Okay, it's working for Erica. I just put the link to the presentation, like to the, yeah, is it working?
There we go.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, so yeah, so we're considering these questions. What are the benefits and drawbacks
Thank you.
of the town centers? Does anybody want to add in?
You know, one thing I can share, Karen, from our experience in Truckee is we had a very low income development come in right into very middle of downtown in a really high profile area. And you know, it's pros and cons. One thing that I can share is that the high visibility of it, I think, exposed the project to a lot of criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one experience I can share. Of course, there are, a lot of positive aspects to it being convenient and close to town as well.
Is there anything you would have changed about that particular project to make it, I don't know, is there anything you would have changed?
Oh,
Elizabeth,
gosh,
did you?
it'd be a good question for Chris. That'd be a good question for Christina. She's very connected to that. The foundation is really connected to that project. So maybe a good question for her. I'd be curious what she would say. I'm sure they have given it quite a lot of reflection. I'm sure they've got a pretty deep answer to that question.
Yeah, okay. So far, what I'll just summarize kind of what input people have given so far. So for the most part, it sounds like folks are saying that there's a benefit when the CPZ boundaries and the town centers overlap. And so that the CPZs could get the expanded benefits of town centers. But there's a concern like that we do want to prevent developers from maybe being able to take advantage of any incentives that actually provide those, end up resulting in those negative impacts for CPZ areas. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk a little bit more about that. Like, what are there things that, like, incentives that you would want to encourage in those areas, and something specific that you would want to say that maybe we don't encourage where in areas where CPZs and town centers overlap?
Well, I mean, I have a question. I think in terms of like town centers where there are multi-unit facilities, how are the current incentives for like deed restriction? Because I can foresee, right? Like the Marriott technically is a multi-unit, but it's like condos and that sort of thing. So I guess my concern with the town centers is deed restriction. Is that a possibility, or are all these going to end up being, second homes, condos for private sellers?
Yeah, so right now, the way it is there are, in town centers, there are more incentives for multifamily, whether it's deed restricted or not. So more incentives for like multifamily than outside of town centers. But then there's even more incentives for deed restricted multifamily in town centers. So they're sort of tiered. So it's like town centers have greater incentives overall than areas that aren't town centers. And then if you're doing deed restricted housing, you get even more incentives.
So I guess I don't know enough, but something to consider is what deed restriction looks like in this area, because I think the concern in the overlap is that you get more Marriott type
Yeah.
second home condo stuff in
Yeah.
that area, which then takes away the extra benefits of having transportation in that area that is easily accessible. It seems to incentivize more tourist accessibility than
Yeah.
it does for people who are impacted by housing.
What about the question of, like, I thought that was a very interesting discussion that we had earlier about trying to have fewer boundaries and focus more on criteria. And to that point, I guess I'm wondering, like in town centers right now, we encourage mixed use and we encourage commercial. We do allow commercial tourists. It's sort of like everything is allowed and encouraged in town centers. And so I'm wondering, should all of that be encouraged in these areas where we currently have high populations of the target communities? And I know, Erica, notwithstanding what you just said, but in the other types of development beyond like second home condos, like other tourist and commercial and mixed use.
I thought that was an interesting comment too, Karen. What I had thought when I heard that, I was thinking more along the lines of like inclusionary zoning. If because now we can get outside of town centers, and where projects come in, that are for profit or market, now there's going to be a portion of affordable housing in that development, and that helps to spread out units, throughout the basin rather than keeping it all concentrated in the town center areas. That's just I don't know, just a thought throwing it out. I didn't see anything about inclusionary zoning in the like summary of the briefing book, so I thought I'd throw that out maybe here too.
So like, maybe, are you saying that if inclusionary zoning happens and it works to kind of distribute affordable housing throughout areas where it hadn't been distributed before, that maybe some of these concerns of the impacts of certain types of development in town centers wouldn't be as bad?
Yeah, like that comment earlier about, there not being enough land or space
Uh-huh.
to satisfy all the need for multifamily or affordable. Um, one way and including it, beyond these town centers would be, possible some type of variation of maybe inclusionary zoning, because I know that's not something that is used often anymore, but something that would require, you know, affordable units and market. I don't know if there's other tools for like that are like that anymore, outside of inclusionary zoning policies, but just throwing it out there really.
Thank you.
To add to that point too, I think it is also a way to address the concern that was raised earlier about um further segregating those zones and just sort of well, I mean, yeah, concentrating all the affordable housing units in one area, town centers. And so that I think that's a good point, and that's a way to address that and sort of have more housing units spread out across the community as opposed to concentrated in just these areas.
So just a question. So just make sure I understand your point. So are you suggesting that, let's just take, for example, Kings Beach, that we have CPZs that with specific criteria that allow us to create these zones in Kings Beach beyond what exists today. So are you saying rather than have it all in one neighborhood, you intersperse it throughout all the neighborhoods so that it gives a better view of equity and equality across the whole town center? Is that what you're saying, Denise?
Sort of. I think I'm just thinking about I forget what the name of the map is, the opportunity zone map that it seems to define the zones where housing is needed as the zones with more resources, or the what do they call, the highest resource zones.
TCAC, yeah, TCAC and highest resource, right?
Yeah. So I think it's, I don't know, it just seems like that is a little bit in, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I see it, it's a little bit the opposite of the community priority zones, because these are zones that we have, or that we think that more housing is needed in these zones because of the priority communities are concentrated there, and the all the other criteria. And so I guess if we to Dan's point of zoning, I think that would be a way of spreading out the housing units and not just have them concentrated in one area, because I know one of the concerns with the opportunity zones is that, is to address that segregation. So yeah, to me, I think that's I mean, just an idea too, but yeah.
To Erica's point about not encouraging kind of market rate housing in town centers, do you think that we should only allow deed restricted, or should we allow some types of market rate housing? And if not, like, to what extent do we still want to encourage tourist-oriented development, that whether that's for sale housing or hotels, and where should that go?
I mean, I think as I was looking at the way that it was written in the book, or in the regulations, it seems like the incentives weren't tiered in a certain way. So there's ways I think you could tier incentives, right? Like which type of property would have more incentive than the other, and make them more like, you do have to make the incentive more prominent than it currently is, right? So whether that's, and then you could do that by proportionality, whatever that looks like. But, perhaps certain deed restriction has higher incentives than certain other ones. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing at all. But I think, when we're talking about, and as a as Denise was saying, you know, we're trying to decentivize segregation too. Like it's definitely makes sense to have multi-use in that kind of way, tourist accommodations, whatever. But right now, as they're written, it's more the TAUs are more incentivized. So you kind of got to flip the incentives. But I do agree
Yeah.
too, is the other issue, and again, bringing up to Denise's point, is people don't just because people are struggling more financially doesn't mean they want to be in a more um, intense town center unit. They could want to live out, so the expanding the boundary helps that. But I think the way that I keep looking at these developmental rights is just the way that we're stacking incentives and the way that we can incentivize certain more proportionally.
Antonio?
So I think we can still encourage like market rate, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like deed restricted because there are rules in place, like the Tenant Protection Act. It wouldn't really necessarily apply to any new development, but maybe it can be something where um, it could be put in place that those limitations on rent increases and when uh, like evictions can occur can be expanded through like just local jurisdictions, expanding those protections to um, new housing developments. So that way you could still have market rate, but at the same time still have some protections for folks, and avoid having the large fluctuations in rent increases that could come with newer development.
Do any of you have a sense of whether, I mean, I like what Erica's saying about kind of stacking or tiering incentives. I guess one thing that we've never put sort of in its own category, and I'm not 100% sure how much control we have over this, but is like encouraging rental, like market rate rental housing, but not allowing it to be for sale. Because once housing goes up for sale, it seems like it's highly likely to become used as second homes versus most multifamily rental housing is for the most part used for the local workforce, as I understand. We don't have a specific category saying like, okay, if you do this development, it has to stay as rental housing.
Right. It also depends on the duration of the rentals, right? So if it's long-term rentals, 6 or 12 months, absolutely. And I'm not totally familiar with the short-term rental restrictions like in California on the lake. I know here in Incline Village, there are very few restrictions. And that does drive a type of disruption in in the Nevada side of the north side of the lake. But I like the idea of having long-term rentals that come out of this process, even if they're market-based. But maybe they're for every, let's say you have a multi-family dwelling that has, pick a number, 8 units, maybe you can tier that. So some of them are market-based and some of them are restricted so that they're available to people with lower income.
Okay.
Anybody else have comments on these questions here or anything else that's related to this or the other activities from the day? Or from the morning?
I actually have a question on this last bullet. About the practices can adopt to address commercial tourist growth. Is it within the scope of this focus group to make housing available to drive more tourism?
In what do you mean, housing for like tourist-based housing or housing that supports businesses by providing more workforce housing?
Well, is it within our remit to find ways to promote housing in the Tahoe Basin for tourists? As opposed to residents who live and work here?
I am gonna say no. And we can look back at the project outcomes, the intended project outcomes, but I do not think that, just speaking from my recollection, I think we crafted the outcomes to not support that, so that if if we started getting a lot of proposals through this process that were focused on encouraging tourist-based housing, that would be outside of what the group had kind of said they wanted
Sure.
the goals of the project to be, yeah.
In some ways, it would be counter to our primary focus, right?
Yeah, I think so. What do others think?
I think it brings up a good question about whether these ADUs that are being potentially used as short-term rentals, if there are more options available for tourists, if that would, incentivize owners to put them up for long-term rentals, or are we kind of maybe we're at a point where that, it's already too late for that. So I guess I'm not sure kind of where the data may put forth whether how many of these ADUs are used for short terms that could maybe be thought of as converting them more into long-term rentals.
Like that we, through this process, could sort of incentivize ADUs that are currently being used as short-term rentals to come back into the long-term housing stock.
Yeah, and then whether or not, there's an incentive you put that, or is it looking into a little bit more of a sustainable like commercial or tourist growth, so that way it's like the market itself would just decentivize putting up a like ADU as a short-term rental versus a long-term.
Oh, wait, could you just expand on that a little bit? Like, how are you thinking that the market might de-incentivize using it?
Well, like if there's a lot more cheaper, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, but if there's more like commercial or tourist housing available through like then it would make and having it cheaper, then that would it would make more, you could earn more money as a long-term rental versus a short-term rental.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So almost like if there was an increase in, wait, am I understanding this? If there was an increase in supply of tourist-based housing, that might lower the price that you could get if you're using it as a short-term rental, and so therefore a long-term rental might pencil better for people.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, all right, so we'll be back in the main room soon, and then Antonio, thanks for being the reporter. Does anybody else have anything else to say before we close out?
No, I think I really appreciate Flint, you bringing that up, because I do think there was a comment in there about using ADUs for like caretakers, which was an interesting conversation, because I don't think people who we think about using caretakers in Tahoe does feel like it's a specific type of, income bracket. So I think that was a really good point to bring up, and I just wanted to give kudos to that.
Thank you. Will we all be together this afternoon again? Do you know, Karen?
So it kind of depends how many there are online. You can be if you want, or we can break you up into smaller. I think it depends. If it's the same amount of people, we'll probably all be together. If we get like starting to be like 8 to 12 people, we'll probably break you into separate breakout rooms because there'll be different topics.
Okay.
And you can like, because we have two different topics, we have development rights and then we have sort of like process. And so we want you to be in the room with the presentation so you can hear the presentation. And we have two different Zoom rooms. We'll have two different rooms with two different Zoom presentations. So yes, do you guys have maybe let me know. You could email me or something if you have a preference for being all together in one group or separately.
Well, I think it's a good group, so.
Yeah.
Less the size
All right,
changes.
so for the folks who are
Okay, thanks, you guys.
online, we're gonna start our report back now. And I'm gonna ask maybe the report back hero from the online group to report back first. If you want to tell us a little bit about what you talked about, some of the benefits and drawbacks of the overlapping geographies. What do you think about the boundaries with town centers and CPCs and if they should be adjusted, and any other practices you all talked about addressing kind of the benefits and burdens of new housing development. And we'll start with folks online first. So who's our report back person?
Sure. My name's Antonio Valdez with Legal Services in Northern California. We had a really good discussion. So kind of starting off, overall, I think people were in favor of extending or in favor of the overlap and liking to expand the CPZs to include town center areas in order to better have more incentives available for these CPZs and take advantage of those that town centers have. Also, that could it would be able to incorporate just to make sure that we work to incorporate low-income individuals that we've identified as being particularly vulnerable groups. We should always also keep in mind to if there is an expansion to put laws in place for developers not to take advantage of any incentives that would hurt our stakeholders. We discussed inclusionary housing zoning to help with that and to spread out the distribution of affordable housing throughout the basin. There's a suggestion of having incentives tiered in order to promote the use of affordable housing and to prevent there from being uneven balance between housing and impacting versus commercial and tourist groups on the CPZ. Other ideas we're talking about restrictions on sales for on property to keep it renting a rental property, and restrictions on short-term rentals as well. I think that kind of covers a lot. Please, from the group, if there's anything that we might have missed, please jump in.
Anyone else online want to add to that report back? Okay. I'll just say a couple of those additional ideas you talked about around STRs, inclusionary housing are going to be talked about this afternoon at our 1 o'clock meeting focused on the policy topic areas of housing models, housing occupancy, as well as costs and process. So if you're interested in those topics, that's a good meeting for you to go dig into things like inclusionary housing, STRs, and deed restrictions. So we're going to go to the room now and just get a report out from folks in the room. We'll start at the very back in the left-hand side. You want to go ahead and share?
All right. Well, we had similar discussions as the first group, so I won't reshare those. But I do think that Chris and I really focus on the fact that there are opportunities with these overlapping sites, really identifying that these are areas that we could have opportunity sites. Where the community priority zones and the bonus units and town centers can all overlap. Those actually would yield sort of that high priority area. So that could be one piece. We also talked about how the overlap can also help to show cultural cohesion and the importance of maintaining cultural cohesion in the basin of areas where there's primarily been the working class, or also allowing the working class to be able to spread out around the basin, because I think that creates healthier communities. Anything else?
Cultural cohesion is definitely important. And I was asking about what kind of feedback we got from these communities, whether we have any data to work with. Do they want to be in those communities, those priority communities? Do they want to spread? And then would they actually move out of the community if their income increased? Would there be, could you set up for moderate housing or even achievable elsewhere that they'd be attracted to? And we had a discussion about that, and the example was given that it doesn't work that well to build outside these zones. But this all brings up the question of concentration in that cultural community. Does that, if they want to be there, can you bring other housing in there? Would they want other housing coming in? Would they move out, as I've already mentioned? How do we prevent this concern about segregation?
The other piece too is just about mapping, and we do believe that there could be a really good opportunity to remap opportunity sites with these overlays. And then of course, just the last piece is practices. I think we all know that funding and creative programs to utilize our existing housing stock is something that is really the low-hanging fruit in the basin. When half of our existing housing stock is empty, these are opportunities, and so we don't want to miss that. And I think if TRPA could be a leader in that venue, it would be really amazing, because all the local jurisdictions are stepping up with very creative programs, and there's no reason why TRPA can't be a part of that solution.
Great, and I'll just say one thing related to the community cohesion point is when we did our round of engagement through last year, we heard a lot about meeting the current need for folks in the basin for housing, but also there's a huge unmet need. So people who have left or are being forced to leave that would like to stay here somewhere in the basin. It wasn't necessarily clear about where exactly that was, if it was the same neighborhoods or similar neighborhoods. But we did hear also a lot about people wanting to keep that cohesion, folks who had lived here for long periods of time, wanted to be able to raise their families here and continue to raise their families here as working class individuals. So we heard a lot of those two thematic themes, which I think link well with what you talked about on community cohesion. How about front right?
I think we had some comments that kind of went back to the last discussion of the existing overlapping geographies are limiting. And we would still prefer to see a more criteria-based system versus boundary line system to incentivize residential housing. We did comment though that the overlap could make sense more for senior housing, which I think has been noted that we're not really focusing on around the lake, but senior housing is good to have next to all the services near those town centers and CBDs. Also, within a lot of those overlapping geographical boundaries, there are sites that aren't big enough for housing. There are environmentally sensitive lands, so they may not actually be appropriate for particularly affordable housing, which requires, 60 to 80 units to be tax credit competitive. And then also within the overlapping boundaries, particularly in the town centers, sometimes outside of the town centers too, there are competing land uses. The communities and a lot of the jurisdictions are really trying to prioritize commercial and hotel uses, especially when pitted against STRs. And housing, so now you have commercial, you have TAU or hotel, and then you have housing, three competing land uses. Workforce housing is never going to be the one that pencils there. I think that covers kind of 1 and 2. The third one we had a lot of comments on. It was the competing uses, trying to get workforce housing to pencil. How do we look at where existing housing is and try to utilize the existing housing to their group's point? ADUs was one idea. Allowing duplexes in single family areas, tiering the residential units so that an ADU or an 800 square foot cabin is not the same unit as like a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot home. Providing the carrot and the stick for keeping and not demoing existing small homes. We're seeing that as a huge trend in a lot of these neighborhoods. And how can we create policy or change the RUU system so that we're preventing demolition of small homes and replacement by large homes, which also then is ultimately affecting the market value of the small homes to be higher than what they actually should be. And those are naturally affordable by design and could be used for local worker housing.
Great, thanks. I just want to say that you touched on a lot of issues, some of which will come up in our afternoon discussions as we talked about like housing occupancy and models. That's one of the conversations this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Talked about ADUs and expanded sites. Those are tomorrow in the development rights and zoning session. So these are ideas that are in the briefing book that we're going to talk about in more detail over the next couple of days. But I want to go back to one thing because we've mentioned it a few times before we get to the other report outs, is this criteria-based system. Maybe you could start, and what are some of the criteria when you say criteria-based system instead of a zonal or a boundary-based system? Why don't you just rip off as many criteria that you're thinking about, and we'll give others an opportunity to add on to those criteria, because I know it's been a conversation point this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from the conversations I've seen that the residential bonus unit boundary is actually a better boundary than the town center or CPC.
Okay.
So that would be incorporating the relationship and proximity to transit. The land capability, whether it's adjacent to or nearby an existing multifamily zone district. There are some parcels that are just outside of an existing multifamily zone district that owners have wanted to build workforce housing on, but they would need to go through an elaborate rezone process. So I think things like that.
Okay, anyone else want to just popcorn a few criteria?
We had the exact same ones.
Same ones?
Land capability.
Yeah.
Land capability, proximity to existing multifamily housing, RBU boundaries, the residential bonus unit
The
boundaries.
housing, like the housing map seems to be down, but we were trying to check out the bonus unit boundary area, all the other overlays too. And yeah, I think we're all kind of like the bonus unit boundary area is like.
Because it's really oriented around transit existing in plan.
Great. Just give anyone online an opportunity to add to that question about criteria, a criteria-based system as opposed to a boundary-based system. Is there anyone online who'd like to speak to that? or add to it?
I think one of the things that I was saying in our group was about the way that the incentives, they could be tiered different and proportional based on how much we want in that area. I know we don't have quite right now like numbers of what that looks like, but incentivizing certain amounts of deed restricted versus TAUs and other stuff could change the incentive, the way that we're incentivizing. So it's not so restricted in zones, but just based on what type of building is generally being built.
Great, thank you. Anyone else online? Anyone else here? Not, we'll go to the Jessica. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the drawbacks we spoke about was limited opportunity. So a big discussion was about how there's a lot of these maps, but most of the property is owned by private landowners. So what is the incentive going to these landowners to actually do the different kinds of development? So we talked about that, especially in Incline Village. We talked about identifying meaningful areas does not in itself incentivize any sort of investment. So similar to that, even you can give all the incentives, but it depends on the property owner. We talked about differences between jurisdictions and the types of incentives that we do or do not provide and who that is going to. And a lot of the barriers to building that already preclude growth that we know about. We talked about how the maps reflect where affordable housing projects are, but miss some areas, opportunities like I mentioned earlier, SROs or MFD or multifamily development properties and where those exist on the map. And that's where we see a lot of interest too. And for the second, we talked about expanding the boundaries. The small boundaries make it very difficult, especially to explain to people. Every jurisdiction is unique and has its own development challenges. So each one of these maps that we're looking at has very different challenges that we're not really acknowledging, but creating a template overlay. And then we talked about creating no boundaries for affordable and workforce. And then for some practices for TRPA, we talked about a no net loss policy. Development rights, similar to, I think Emily or Erica was talking about scaling the development. So it's not the same for a single family home or a studio or a ADU.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So if you want to talk about scalable development rights this afternoon, 1 p.m. development rights group, just trying to connect up the ideas that you have with ideas of the briefing book and when we're going to talk about them in a lot more detail this afternoon. All right, I think we got one last group. Yeah.
Great. So I'll try to summarize our conversation. First of all, we got a little bit off of the questions because we sort of started to engage with that in the context of the conversation we had this morning about the limits to the community priority zones as maybe not very useful as places to be prioritizing development. And the town centers and the CPZs were developed with very different intentions, where the town centers were really areas of commercial focus, the CPZs areas that are sort of underrepresented, and so they kind of have different utility, and so we didn't see a lot of value in the overlap. But to jump to the third question there about addressing the potential impacts of development, we do think that those CPZs are good areas for housing preservation policy, for limits to other land uses like vacation home rentals, to anti-displacement policies, and a good place to focus incentives like home efficiency upgrades. And we were especially interested and heard some of this from the other groups as well in that mapping exercise of identifying where do we want to prioritize development if it's not these particular layers. And really that bonus unit boundary is better areas with high land capability and close to transit. And we'd love to see that map, and maybe we could come up with a catchy name to kind of refer to that overlapping area because bonus unit boundary isn't close to That's all I got, thanks.
Anyone else? Well, I'll just give it, we have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. Does anyone have any kind of closing thoughts for this morning? Before we kind of transition into short lunch break, we have about an hour, I think, for lunch, but we can give it over to Chris to take us through that. But before we do that, just 1 or 2 more, Rob, and then we'll go, if there's anyone online who has any additional thoughts or comments you want to make on this morning's exercise.
To kind of highlight some of what we were saying is, like, you define these regions and say that you can do certain things here. And the housing needs like 5,000 units, right? That's really what the number is, 5,000. What can those properties hold? How many of those property owners are willing to move forward with it? It's like very limiting, like we're just tying our hands behind our back and saying we're gonna solve the problem. So expanding stuff and trying to look different, what we need to be looking at, because you can say, oh, this is what we want this housing here. But if no one in that area that owns that property is willing to do it, it might sit there for 50 years. Then we get stagnation, nothing happens.
That's right, and there was I heard the conversation, maybe it was your group actually, that was talking about this, and it came up this morning as in the earlier sessions as well. Is, are there capacity in these town centers to meet these housing needs that we have? So we showed that chart earlier with a need of about 7,000, 8,000 units in the basin over a kind of a 6-year period. It's a very short period of time. Are there locations for those within the region generally, and then more specifically within these town centers or these residential boundary unit areas, right? So these are good questions to be asking to understand the implications of how that affects either a criteria-based system or a boundary-based system, and where we're focusing the where of meeting our housing need. Anyone else? Jessica?
I just want to add something that goes off both of these, is something I was actually talking to Nick and Gab about earlier. Was in the city, we have several properties that were built prior to TRPA that were built on sensitive lands, but are still located within a town center. And now those buildings are essentially stuck in time because they can't be redeveloped, because they're on like a 1G. So the best example we have is like the Chevy's building. And so someone proposed building housing there, but we can't build housing because of the restrictions of it being sensitive land. But it is in the middle of a bunch of other buildings. And so how do we sort of mitigate for those types of issues that we see when developers are coming forward to propose something? But it's a difficult, so it could be within criteria too, to think about some of those historic land uses or town centers that were created and how it's shifted over time, and if it's a good use of development.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And just to say, tomorrow, you can come and talk about land coverage in the morning at 9 o'clock, or if you want to talk about expanded sites, you can do that with me actually at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But just want to thank you all for your participation this afternoon and this morning. And I know there's more to go, and I'm going to hand it over to Chris just to kind of take us out this afternoon, or this morning, I guess.
So I'm gonna be brief, so I don't want to stand in between you and your food. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is what we got coming up. So the rest of the day, we're gonna be focused on diving into these subject matter areas that Eric was referring to. So we have development rights, we've got process, we have development cost and fees, and additional housing policy ideas. So I know many of, perhaps most or all of you have already signed up for those. We're gonna kind of slide this partition over here, and so we'll break up into 2 kind of larger groups. And then we have 3 different tables within each of the larger groups. So you can see here, printed out on this, on these kind of whatever papers, what the, you know, your name's there next to the particular table that you signed up. So development rights, pool, residential allocation, and RVUs, banking, conversion, and transfers. Under small group number 1 and small group number 2, we've got table 1, planning and development processes, development costs and fees, and housing occupancy and models. Now the question is for the online folks, how do we go about in terms of determining, you know, which topics they jump in on?
So we have sent everyone who RSVP'd, we told them what topics they are on.
Okay.
And for everyone else, just jump on the Zoom link that we sent you. But I would check your email, actually online folks took your email right before because we may set up a separate Zoom link to have you be in the topic that you said you wanted to be in.
Great, and then anything else on that front? And the last thing is, so tomorrow, we're gonna dive into development standards and zoning. So we'll have small groups on that, followed by closing plenary. And then you can also share your ideas, by the way, on any of these topics. Email, written comments, or set up a one-on-one conversation with Jacob. Or you can also attend office hours. So those are the various additional input methods that you have in addition to this. So with that, unless there's anything else that folks want to convey, I think we should run, yeah.
Yeah. Food is set up in the hall.
Walk out these doors and just kind of veer to your left.
Yeah.
And you'll see
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the folks online as well. Great conversation.
Yes. Don't you hear tomorrow?